The carriage door flew open, before it even stopped moving, and Alira Voss was pulled out by her wrist, so hard that she stumbled onto the cold stone path. "Move faster," snapped the guard holding her arm. "The king does not wait for anyone, especially not for you." Alira caught her breath and looked up at the tall black gates in front of her. They were taller than any building she had ever seen, twisted with iron vines and topped with sharp spikes that seemed to touch the clouds. Behind those gates stood the fortress of Blackmoor, home of the man every kingdom feared, the Alpha King, Cale Draven. Only 2 days ago, Alira had been folding linens in the kitchen of her father's old estate, unaware that her fate was about to be decided by a woman who hated her more than anything else in the world. It had started with a letter. The royal seal had arrived at the Voss estate on a rainy afternoon, carried by a messenger who refused to say anything except that it was for Lady Corvina's household. Alira remembered standing near the doorway, drying her hands on her apron, when her stepmother tore open the envelope and read it in silence. Her lips curled into a smile that made the hallway feel colder. "The Alpha King is requesting a woman of noble blood from every great house," Corvina had said, folding the letter with slow, deliberate movements. "One woman, to be sent to his court as a gift of loyalty." Alira's 2 stepsisters, Lena and Marta, had gone pale and started arguing over who would have to go, both of them terrified of the stories they had heard about the king who ruled with fire in his eyes and cruelty in his hands. Men who defied him were said to vanish. Women who displeased him were said to never return home. Corvina had let them argue for a long moment before raising her hand for silence. "Neither of you will go," she had said, and then her eyes had turned toward Alira, sharp and cold, the way they always did when she looked at the daughter her husband had loved more than anyone else in the world. "She will." Alira had felt her stomach drop, but she had not argued. Arguing with Corvina never worked. It only made things worse. Ever since Alira's father had died 3 years ago, falling ill in a matter of days that no physician could explain, Corvina had run the household as though Alira did not belong in it. She was given the smallest room, the oldest dresses, and the coldest meals. She scrubbed floors that her stepsisters refused to touch, and carried water up staircases that made her arms shake by evening. She had told herself, again and again, that she only had to survive until she was old enough to leave and build a life of her own. She had never imagined her stepmother would use a royal summons to get rid of her completely. "You understand what this means," Corvina had said that night, standing in the doorway of Alira's small room, while Alira packed a single bag with trembling hands. "You are not going as an honored guest. You are going as a punishment. The king does not tolerate weakness, and he certainly does not tolerate insolence. You have both in abundance." "I have done nothing to deserve this," Alira had said quietly, folding a worn shawl into her bag. "You exist," Corvina had replied simply. "That has always been enough." The words still echoed in Alira's mind, as she stood now before the gates of Blackmoor, 2 guards on either side of her, their armor dark and unfamiliar, carved with symbols of wolves bearing their teeth. She had heard whispers on the journey here, soldiers speaking low to each other when they thought she was asleep in the carriage. "No woman sent to the king has ever come back the same," one had murmured. "They say his wolf tore apart the last messenger who brought bad news," another had added, and the first had hushed him quickly, glancing toward Alira, as though worried she might already be broken beyond repair. Alira had kept her eyes closed and her breathing steady, refusing to let them see her fear. She had learned, over the years, how to hide what she felt behind a calm face. It was the only armor she had. Now, standing before the gates, that armor was being tested more than it ever had before. The iron doors groaned open, revealing a courtyard lit by torches, even though it was still daylight. The sky above Blackmoor seemed darker than it should have been, heavy gray clouds pressing low over black stone towers. Alira had never seen a place built with such intention to frighten. Every wall, every statue, every carved wolf snarling from the rooftops, seemed designed to remind visitors that they were entering the domain of something far more powerful than themselves. "Walk," the guard said, pushing her gently forward. Alira lifted her chin and walked. She crossed the courtyard past rows of soldiers who did not look at her, their eyes fixed forward as though she were nothing more than another delivery to be processed and forgotten. She climbed the wide stone steps leading to the main hall, her worn shoes echoing against the polished floor once she stepped inside. The hall was enormous, filled with banners bearing the same wolf crest she had seen on the gates, and lit by chandeliers that dripped with unlit candles, waiting for nightfall. At the far end of the hall stood a throne, carved from black wood, empty for now, and beside it stood a man who was clearly not the king, but someone important, dressed in fine gray robes with silver trim. "Another one," the man muttered, almost to himself, as Elira was brought closer. He looked her over with an expression that was not unkind, but tired, the way someone looks at a problem they have seen too many times before. "What house sends you?" "House Voss," Elira answered, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Voss. I remember the name. Your father was a fair man, from what I recall. A pity what happened to him." Elira said nothing. She had learned long ago that saying too much about her father's death only invited questions she could not answer, questions that made her chest ache with a grief she had never been allowed to properly feel. "I am Osric, advisor to the king," the man continued, folding his hands behind his back. "You will wait here. The king is finishing matters in the northern wing, and he does not like to be summoned before he is ready. When he arrives, you will address him properly. Keep your eyes low, unless he tells you otherwise, and you will not speak unless spoken to. Do you understand?" "I understand," Elira said. Osric studied her for a moment longer, as though trying to decide something. "You do not look frightened," he observed. "I am," Elira admitted honestly, surprising herself with the truth. "I am simply trying not to show it." Something shifted in Osric's expression, something close to respect, though it vanished quickly behind his composed mask. "That may serve you well here," he said quietly, "or it may not. The king has little patience for games, but he has even less patience for those who crumble before him. Whatever you choose, choose it quickly. He is coming." Elira felt the air in the hall change before she heard anything at all. It was a strange sensation, like the pressure before a storm, a weight settling over the room that made every soldier straighten their posture and every servant lower their eyes. The great doors at the side of the hall opened, and Elira turned toward them instinctively, her breath catching in her throat. The Alpha King entered the hall like he owned not just the room, but the very air inside it. He was tall, taller than any man Elira had ever seen, with dark hair that fell just past his sharp jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and endlessly deep. He wore no crown, no ornate robes, only simple black armor that seemed built more for battle than for court, as though he expected danger at any moment and refused to be caught unprepared. His steps were unhurried, deliberate, each one striking the floor with quiet authority that needed no announcement. Elira had expected a monster. What she saw instead was a man who looked like he was carrying the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders, and had been carrying it for so long that he no longer remembered what it felt like to set it down. He did not look at her at first. His eyes swept across Osric, across the guards, across the hall itself, as though searching for a threat that was not there. "Report," he said, his voice low and rough, carrying easily across the vast space without him needing to raise it. "The tribute from House Voss has arrived, my king," Osric said, gesturing toward Elira, "sent in place of the eldest daughter, by order of the Lady Corvina." Cale's eyes finally moved to Elira. She felt the impact of his gaze like a physical thing, a weight pressing against her chest, and she forced herself to meet his eyes, despite every instinct telling her to look away. His expression did not change at first, cold and assessing, the look of a man deciding whether something in front of him was worth his attention at all. But then something flickered behind his eyes. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared slightly, as though he had caught a scent he had not expected. For a brief moment, something raw and startled passed across his face, before he shut it down completely, his expression returning to stone. "Leave us," he said suddenly. Osric blinked in surprise. "My king, protocol suggests." "Leave us," Cale repeated, and this time his voice carried an edge sharp enough to make even his most trusted advisor step back immediately. The hall emptied within moments, guards and servants filing out through the side doors until only Elira and the king remained, the massive space suddenly feeling far too small. Cale descended the few steps from where he stood and walked toward her slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. Elira held her ground, though every part of her wanted to step back. "What is your name?" he asked, stopping a few feet away from her. "Elira," she answered. "Elira Voss." He said nothing for a long moment, simply looking at her, as though trying to solve a puzzle he had not expected to encounter today. Up close, she could see faint scars along his forearms, the kind that came from years of battle rather than accident, and there was something in his eyes that looked less like cruelty and more like exhaustion carried for far too long. "You were sent as punishment," he said finally. It was not a question. Elira's chin lifted slightly. "Yes. For what crime?" "For existing," she said, repeating the words her stepmother had spoken to her, unable to keep the bitterness fully out of her voice. Something almost like the ghost of a smile crossed Cale's face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "That is not a crime I recognize," he said, "though apparently it is one your stepmother takes very seriously." Elira did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. Cale studied her for another long moment, and Elira could see something warring behind his gray eyes, something he seemed to be fighting against with everything he had. Whatever it was, he pushed it down, his expression hardening once more. "You will be given a room in the Eastern Tower," he said, his voice returning to its earlier authority. "You will not wander the fortress without an escort. You will not speak to my soldiers unless necessary. And you will stay far away from the Western Wing. Is that understood?" "Understood," Elira said. He turned as though to walk away, then paused, glancing back at her over his shoulder. For just a moment, the mask slipped again, and Elira saw something in his expression that looked almost like confusion, as though he could not understand why he had not simply sent her away already. "Why did you not beg?" he asked quietly, the way the others do. Elira thought of Corvina's cold eyes, of the years spent proving to herself that she would not break no matter how many times the world tried to force her to. "Begging has never saved me from anything," she said honestly. "I stopped trying a long time ago." Cale did not respond to that, but something in his shoulders shifted, some tension she had not noticed, until it eased slightly. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Elira standing alone in the vast, cold hall, uncertain whether she had just survived her first meeting with the feared Alpha King, or simply delayed whatever fate truly awaited her. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky above Blackmoor, and somewhere deep within the fortress, a guard was already preparing the Eastern Tower for its newest, unexpected guest. A young woman appeared at Elira's side moments later, dressed in a simple gray uniform, her dark hair pulled back tightly. "I am Nora," she said, offering a small, careful smile. "I will show you to your room." Elira followed her, through winding corridors, lined with tall windows, that let in only thin streaks of gray light. The fortress felt like a maze, built by someone who wanted to confuse anyone who tried to leave. Every hallway looked similar to the last, stone walls broken only by iron torch brackets, and the occasional tapestry, showing scenes of wolves running through dark forests. "You are the first tribute in a long while who was not carried out of that hall in tears," Nora said quietly, as they climbed a narrow staircase. "Is that common?" Elira asked. "More common than you would think," Nora admitted. "The king has a way of looking at people that makes them feel as though he can see straight through to their worst secrets. Most cannot bear it." Elira thought of the moment his eyes had first met hers, the way something had flickered behind his gaze before he shut it away again. She did not mention it to Nora. She was not entirely sure what it meant herself. They reached a heavy wooden door at the top of the tower, and Nora pushed it open to reveal a room far more comfortable than Elira had expected. A large bed sat near a window overlooking the dark forest beyond the fortress walls, and a small fireplace crackled quietly in the corner, already lit against the evening chill. "This is far nicer than I imagined," Elira said honestly. "The king does not house his guests poorly, whatever else people say about him," Nora replied, setting a folded set of clothing on the end of the bed. "Rest now. Someone will bring food shortly. Tomorrow, life at Blackmoor truly begins for you, and it is rarely dull." After Nora left, Elira sat by the window for a long time, watching the storm clouds thicken over the distant trees. She thought about her father, about the estate she had grown up in, before Corvina had turned it into something unrecognizable. She thought about the years of scrubbing floors and swallowing insults, of telling herself that somewhere, somehow, her life would eventually become her own again. She had not expected that path to lead her here, to the fortress of a king feared across every kingdom, a man whose eyes held more sorrow than cruelty, whose voice carried authority without needing to shout, and whose reaction to her arrival had been nothing like what the whispered stories had promised. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She expected Nora returning with food, but instead found one of the king's soldiers standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "The king wishes to know if you require anything for the night," the soldier said stiffly, as though the words felt unfamiliar in his mouth. Elira blinked in surprise. "No," she said slowly. "I am well, thank you." The soldier nodded once and turned to leave, but paused at the top of the stairs. "For what it is worth," he said without turning around, "in 3 years serving this king, I have never once heard him ask after the comfort of anyone brought to this fortress. Whatever happened in that hall today, it was not nothing." He disappeared down the staircase before Elira could respond, leaving her standing in the doorway with her heart beating strangely fast. She closed the door slowly and returned to the window, watching lightning flicker somewhere far beyond the trees. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, whether the king's strange behavior was a sign of mercy or simply the calm before something far worse. But for the first time since Corvina's cruel smile had sealed her fate, Elira allowed herself a small, cautious breath of something that almost felt like hope. Whatever Blackmore truly was, whatever Cale Draven truly wanted from her, she would face it the same way she had faced everything else in her life, with her head held high and her fear held quietly, carefully, out of sight. The storm outside grew heavier as night fell fully over the fortress, thunder rattling the old windows of the eastern tower. Somewhere below, in a chamber far darker and colder than Elira's own, Cale Draven stood alone before a dying fire, his hands braced against the stone mantel, his mind replaying the moment her scent had reached him across the length of the great hall. It had been years since anything had stirred the part of him he had locked away after losing everything he once loved. He had told himself, after that loss, that he would never again allow himself to feel anything close to what he had felt then. He had built walls of ice and iron around whatever remained of his heart, ruling his kingdom through strength alone, refusing every softness that came near him. Yet standing in that hall today, looking into the steady, unafraid eyes of a girl sent to him as punishment, something inside him had cracked, quietly and without permission. He did not know what it meant. He was not certain he wanted to find out. But deep within him, a part of himself he had thought long silenced had opened one eye, and it was watching her with an interest he could not explain and did not know how to stop. Elira woke to the sound of raised voices echoing up through the tower stairwell, sharp and urgent enough to pull her from sleep before dawn had fully broken. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding, and crossed to the door to listen. 2 guards were arguing somewhere below, their words muffled but their tone unmistakably tense. "The king has not slept," one of them muttered. "He paced the war room the entire night. Something has unsettled him." "Since when does anything unsettle the Alpha King?" the other replied. Elira stepped back from the door, her pulse still quick. She did not know if their words had anything to do with her, but a part of her suspected they might. She dressed quickly in the simple clothing Nora had left for her, and moments later, a soft knock came at her door. "You are awake early," Nora said, stepping inside with a tray of bread and warm tea. "Good. The king wishes to see you after you have eaten." "Did something happen?" Elira asked carefully. Nora hesitated, glancing toward the door as though checking they were truly alone. "There was word from the northern border overnight," she said quietly. "Nothing that concerns you directly, but it has put the whole fortress on edge. I would advise choosing your words carefully today." Elira ate quickly, her appetite dulled by nerves, and followed Nora back through the winding corridors of Blackmore. In the daylight, the fortress looked different than it had the evening before, still imposing, but less like a place built purely to frighten. Sunlight struggled through narrow windows, illuminating detailed carvings along the stone walls that told stories of an old kingdom she did not yet understand. They found Cale in a smaller chamber this time, not the grand hall from before, but a study, lined with maps and old books, a single window letting in gray morning light. He stood with his back to the door, shoulders tense, studying a map spread across a long wooden table. "Leave us," he said, without turning around, and Nora slipped away instantly, leaving Alira alone with him once more. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Alira studied the back of his broad shoulders, the way his hands rested against the table's edge, as though bracing himself against something unseen. "You did not sleep," she said finally, surprising herself with the observation. Cale turned slightly, glancing at her over his shoulder. "How would you know that? You have the look of someone who has not," Alira said simply. "I have seen it before. On myself, more nights than I can count." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of curiosity breaking through the exhaustion. And why would a young woman lose so much sleep? Alira considered lying, softening the truth the way she had learned to do around Corvina. But something about the quiet study, the early hour, and the strange honesty that seemed to exist naturally between them, made her choose otherwise. "Grief," she said, "and fear. Sometimes both at once." Cale turned fully to face her now, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she forced herself not to. "Grief for your father," he said. It was not a question. Alira blinked in surprise. "You know about my father?" "Osric mentioned the name Voss to me last night," Cale said. "I remember him. He visited this fortress once, many years ago, seeking an alliance for trade routes through the northern passes. He was an honest man, in a world that rarely rewards honesty." He paused, something darkening behind his eyes. "I was sorry to hear of his passing." Alira felt an unexpected tightness rise in her throat. No one had spoken so plainly about her father in years. Corvina had forbidden his name from being mentioned in the house, as though grief itself were an inconvenience to be buried alongside him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Cale studied her for another long moment, before turning back to the map on the table, his jaw tightening, as though he had allowed himself more openness than he intended. "There is unrest along the northern border," he said, changing the subject with obvious effort. "A rival pack has grown bold in recent months, testing the edges of my territory. It is not something that concerns you, but it means my attention will be divided in the coming days." "Why tell me this?" Alira asked. "I am little more than a stranger sent here as punishment." Cale's eyes lifted to hers again, something unreadable passing behind them. "I am not entirely certain," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. "But I find myself wanting to explain things to you regardless." The admission hung in the air between them, heavier than either of them seemed prepared for. Cale cleared his throat and straightened, his expression hardening once more into the composed authority Alira had first witnessed in the Great Hall. "You will have free movement within the eastern and central wings of the fortress," he said. "Nora will assist you with anything you require. I ask only that you remain cautious. Blackmore is not always kind to those unfamiliar with its ways." "Is that a warning?" Alira asked. "It is honesty," Cale said. "Something I suspect you value as much as I do." Before Alira could respond, the study door opened sharply, and a broad-shouldered man entered without waiting for permission, his expression tight with urgency. He wore armor similar to Cale's, though marked with additional insignia that suggested rank. "My king, the scouts have returned from the border," the man said, then paused, his eyes flicking toward Alira with open suspicion. "Apologies. I was not aware you were occupied." "Speak freely, Bran," Cale said. "What did they find?" General Bran hesitated only a moment before continuing. "The rival pack is gathering more strength than we anticipated, and there are whispers, my king, troubling ones, suggesting the unrest may not be isolated to the northern border alone. Some believe it connects to old grievances closer to home." Cale's expression darkened considerably, the warmth Alira had briefly witnessed vanishing entirely, replaced by the cold, guarded authority of a ruler carrying old wounds. "We will discuss this further within the hour," he said. "Prepare the war council." Bran nodded and left as quickly as he had arrived, though not before casting another suspicious glance toward Alira, one that made her skin prickle uncomfortably. "He does not trust me," she observed once the door had closed again. "Bran trusts very few people," Cale said. "It has kept this kingdom alive more than once. Do not take it personally." Alira nodded, though she could not help wondering exactly what old grievances the general had referred to, and whether they had anything to do with the shadows she had seen briefly cross Cale's face, the moment his own past had been mentioned. You should return to the Eastern Tower, Kale said, his tone shifting back to formal distance. I have matters that require my full attention today. Illyra turned to leave, but paused at the door, glancing back at him. For what it is worth, she said, echoing the words the soldier had spoken to her the night before. I do not believe the stories they tell about you. Not entirely, anyway. Kale's eyes met hers, something raw flickering behind the gray for just a moment before he masked it again. Careful, he said quietly. Belief is a dangerous thing to offer someone like me. Perhaps, Illyra said, but I have never been very good at being careful. She left the study before he could respond, her heart beating strangely fast, uncertain whether the warmth spreading through her chest was foolish or the first honest thing she had felt in years. Later that afternoon, wandering the central wing under Nora's watchful guidance, Illyra paused before a long portrait gallery lining one of the fortress corridors. Paintings of past rulers stared down from gilded frames, stern and unfamiliar, until her eyes landed on one far more recent than the rest. It showed a young woman with gentle eyes and dark hair, standing beside a younger version of Kale, his expression softer than Illyra had yet seen it, filled with an openness that seemed impossible for the man she had met that morning. Who is she? Illyra asked quietly. Nora's expression grew somber. That is Lyra, she said. The king's first mate. She died 5 years ago, and the fortress has not been the same since. Illyra studied the portrait a moment longer, something heavy settling in her chest, as she realized just how deep the wounds beneath Kale's cold exterior likely ran. Whatever waited for her at Blackmoor, she understood now that she was not the only one carrying grief through these dark stone halls, and that understanding, unexpectedly, made her feel a little less alone. Nora gently touched her arm, urging her forward. Come, she said softly. Some things are better left undisturbed for now. Illyra allowed herself to be led away, but she cast one last glance over her shoulder at the portrait, at the soft, long-lost smile on Kale Draven's painted face, and wondered how many more secrets Blackmoor was still hiding behind its cold stone walls. That evening, Nora brought word that Illyra was expected to join the king for the evening meal, a request that surprised them both equally. The dining hall was smaller than the great hall Illyra had first entered, warmed by a large fireplace and lined with tall shelves of old books, giving it a quieter, more private feeling than the rest of the fortress. Kale was already seated when she arrived, a plate of untouched food in front of him, his expression distant, as though his mind remained fixed on the war council from earlier that day. He looked up as she entered, and for a brief moment, something in his shoulders eased. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. You need not stand on ceremony here. Illyra took her seat carefully, unsure of the rules of this strange new world she had been thrown into. I did not expect an invitation, she admitted. Neither did I, if I am honest, Kale said, a faint, almost reluctant smile touching the corner of his mouth. Osric will tell you I rarely dine with anyone. He finds it concerning. Should I be concerned as well? Illyra asked, allowing a small amount of humor into her voice for the first time since arriving at Blackmoor. Kale's smile grew slightly, genuine this time, though it vanished as quickly as it appeared, as though he were unused to allowing himself such simple moments. Perhaps a little, he said. I am told I am not the easiest company. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Illyra found herself studying him quietly, noticing small details she had missed before, the tension that never fully left his shoulders, the way his eyes occasionally drifted toward the window, as though watching for a threat that never fully went away. Tell me about your council today, she said eventually. If you are permitted to share. Kale considered her for a long moment before answering. The northern pack grows bolder each season, he said. For years, I believed their unrest was simple ambition, territory and pride, nothing more. But today, my general suggested something darker, that someone within my own court may be feeding them information, weakening our defenses from the inside. Illyra's chest tightened at the thought. Do you know who? Not yet, Kale admitted, his jaw tightening. But I intend to find out. He studied her carefully after speaking, as though gauging her reaction, and Illyra realized with a small jolt of surprise that he was watching her the way one might watch someone they were beginning, cautiously, to trust. You do not look at me the way the others in this fortress do, she said quietly. Brand suspects me. The guards whisper when they think I cannot hear. Yet you speak to me as though I am simply another person, rather than a stranger sent here as punishment. Cale set down his cup slowly, his gray eyes steady on hers. Perhaps that is because you do not carry yourself like someone sent here as punishment, he said. You carry yourself like someone who has already survived far worse than anything this fortress could offer. Alira felt something warm bloom quietly in her chest at his words, an understanding she had not expected to find in a place so cold and unfamiliar. You are not what the stories say either, she said softly. The stories exist for a reason, Cale said, his voice lower now, almost guarded. I have done things in this position that I am not proud of, things necessary to keep this kingdom standing. Do not mistake tonight's conversation for the whole truth of who I am. I do not think anyone is only their worst moments, Alira said. If that were true, I would be nothing more than a girl who scrubbed floors and swallowed insults for 3 years, waiting for a life that never seemed to arrive. Cale's eyes softened at that, something unspoken passing between them, heavy and fragile all at once. Far beyond the walls of Blackmoor, in a candlelit room within the Voss estate, Lady Corvina sat before a mirror, brushing her daughter Lena's hair, while a letter lay open on the table beside her, delivered just hours earlier, by a messenger, loyal only to coin. She has not been destroyed, Corvina murmured, reading the brief report a second time, her fingers tightening around the parchment. The fool actually survived meeting him. Perhaps the king simply has not gotten around to disposing of her yet, Lena offered, though her voice lacked conviction. Corvina's eyes narrowed at her reflection in the mirror. No, she said slowly. This is something else. Something worse. She set the letter down carefully, her mind already turning toward old alliances she had hoped never to need again. Connections built in secret over the years since her husband's untimely and convenient death. If the king has taken an interest in her, then she has become far more dangerous to us than a simple inconvenience. What will you do? Marta asked, from her seat near the window, her voice thin with unease. Corvina's expression hardened into something cold and calculating, the same expression she had worn the night she sealed Alira's fate with a single letter. What I always do, she said quietly. I will make sure the problem disappears, one way or another. Back within the warm dining hall of Blackmoor, unaware of the storm quietly gathering against her from far away, Alira allowed herself, just for a moment, to enjoy the strange, fragile peace of sharing a meal with a king the world called a monster, but who she was beginning to suspect might simply be a man who had never been given the chance to be anything else. A scream echoed through the eastern tower just before dawn, sharp enough to jolt Alira awake and send her running to the door before she had even fully opened her eyes. She threw it open to find Nora standing in the hallway, pale and shaking, staring at a smashed lantern lying broken on the stone floor, dark oil pooling beneath the shattered glass. What happened? Alira asked, pulling Nora gently away from the mess. I do not know, Nora said, her voice trembling. I was carrying it to your room. When something moved in the shadows, I only saw a shape, and then the lantern was falling, and I was screaming, before I even understood why. Guards arrived within moments, torches raised, sweeping the corridor for any sign of an intruder. Alira wrapped her arms around herself, a cold unease settling deep in her stomach. The fortress of Blackmoor was supposed to be the safest place in the kingdom, protected by soldiers loyal to a king feared across every border. If something had slipped through its defenses so easily, then perhaps nowhere within these walls was as safe as she had begun to believe. Cale arrived minutes later, his expression thunderous, his eyes scanning the corridor with an intensity that made even the guards straighten instinctively. Report, he demanded. No intruder found, my king, one of the soldiers said quickly. Only the broken lantern. It is possible the servant simply startled herself in the dark. Cale's gaze shifted to Nora, then to Alira, lingering there a moment longer than necessary. Search the tower again, he ordered. Every corner. I want to know if anyone entered this wing tonight who should not have. The guards dispersed quickly, and Cale stepped closer to Alira, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. Are you unharmed? I am fine, Alira said, though her voice wavered slightly. Nora saw someone. I believe her. Cale's jaw tightened. something dark and protective flashing behind his eyes. "So do I," he said quietly, "which concerns me a great deal." He turned to address the remaining guards stationed near her door. "Double the watch on this tower," he commanded. "No one enters or leaves without my knowledge. Am I understood?" The guards nodded firmly, and Cale turned back to Alira, his expression softening slightly, though the tension in his shoulders remained. "Get some rest, if you can," he said. "I will make certain nothing like this happens again." He left with the guards to search the rest of the fortress, and Alira returned to her room, though sleep refused to come easily after that. She sat by the window until the sky lightened fully into morning, watching the forest beyond the fortress walls shift from black to gray to pale gold as the sun finally rose. By mid-morning, word had spread quietly through the fortress that the search had turned up nothing definitive, only a single set of unfamiliar footprints near a side entrance, rarely used, except by servants delivering supplies from the nearby village. Whoever had been near the tower had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a growing unease that settled over Blackmore like fog. Alira found herself summoned to the war room shortly after breakfast, an invitation she had not expected. Cale stood at the head of a long table covered in maps and reports, General Bran at his side, along with Osric and two other officers Alira did not recognize. The room fell silent as she entered, several pairs of eyes turning toward her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open suspicion. "You wish to see me?" Alira asked, addressing Cale directly, though she could feel Bran's gaze burning into the side of her face. "I did," Cale said. "Given the incident this morning, I want to understand exactly who might wish you harm within these walls, or beyond them. Tell me about your life before Blackmore. Everything you believe might be relevant." Alira hesitated, glancing around the room at the unfamiliar faces watching her closely. "My father died 3 years ago," she began carefully. "Since then, my stepmother has controlled the estate. She has never cared for me, and she made it clear the day I left that she hoped I would not survive whatever awaited me here." "Your stepmother sent you here specifically hoping you would be harmed," Bran said, his tone skeptical. "Yet now, someone within our own walls may have attempted exactly that, only hours after your arrival. Forgive me if I find the timing curious." "Bran," Cale said warningly, but Alira raised a hand gently, unwilling to let the accusation sit unanswered. "I understand your suspicion," she said, meeting Bran's eyes directly. "If I were in your position, I would be cautious as well, but I have no reason to endanger myself, nor any connection to whoever might have been near that tower last night. I have been in this fortress less than 2 days. I know no one here beyond what little I have learned since arriving." Bran studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before finally giving a small, reluctant nod. "Perhaps," he said, "though I would advise the king to remain cautious regardless." "I intend to," Cale said firmly, his eyes briefly meeting Alira's before returning to the map spread before him. "Whoever was near that tower last night, whether connected to the northern unrest or acting alone, I want them found. Increase patrols along the eastern wing and the village entrance. I will not have my fortress compromised, least of all by someone hiding among my own people." The meeting continued for a while longer, discussions of border defenses and supply routes that Alira understood little of, though she remained quietly attentive, absorbing what she could of the world she now found herself tangled within. When the council finally dispersed, Cale asked her to remain behind. "You handled Bran well," he said once the room had emptied. "He is not an easy man to satisfy." "I only told the truth," Alira said. "It seemed the simplest path." Cale studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful behind his gray eyes. "You continue to surprise me," he admitted. "Most who come through those doors as tribute either collapse under scrutiny or attempt to manipulate their way into favor. You do neither." "Would manipulation work on you?" Alira asked, a small, curious smile touching her lips, despite the tension of the morning. "No," Cale said simply, "which is perhaps why I find your honesty such a relief." They walked together through the fortress afterward, an unspoken agreement forming that Alira would remain near him for the rest of the day, given the uncertainty of the previous night. Cale showed her parts of Blackmore she had not yet seen, an old library filled with books older than the kingdom itself, a quiet garden hidden behind stone walls where rare flowers still bloomed, despite the harsh climate, and a training yard, where soldiers sparred beneath the watchful eyes of instructors. This place is not entirely what I expected, Elira admitted, as they walked through the garden, sunlight breaking gently through scattered clouds overhead. What did you expect? Kale asked. Darkness, she said honestly. Cruelty around every corner. Instead, I find gardens and libraries, and a king who worries over the safety of a servant, startled by shadows. Kale's expression grew more serious. Do not mistake occasional kindness for the whole truth of this place, he said quietly. Blackmore has seen darkness, more than you know. I have made choices here that haunt me still. The world outside these walls fears me, for reasons that are not entirely unearned. Everyone carries choices they wish they had made differently, Elira said. That does not mean those choices define the whole of who they are now. Kale stopped walking, turning to face her fully, something raw and unguarded passing behind his eyes. You speak as though you understand this better than most, he said. I have spent 3 years being told that my existence was itself a burden, Elira said quietly. If I believed I was defined only by how others chose to see me, I would have disappeared long ago. I choose, instead, to believe that who I am is something I decide for myself. Kale studied her in silence for a long moment, the garden quiet around them, birds calling softly somewhere among the hedges. I envy that certainty, he said finally. I lost mine a long time ago. Perhaps it is not entirely lost, Elira said gently. Perhaps it has simply been buried beneath everything you have had to carry alone. Something shifted in Kale's expression then, a vulnerability so unexpected that Elira found herself holding her breath, uncertain what would come next. But before he could respond, a soldier appeared at the garden entrance, breathless and urgent. My king, the soldier said, bowing quickly. Forgive the interruption, but General Bran requests your presence immediately. The footprints from last night have been traced beyond the village. He believes he has found something you will want to see yourself. Kale's expression hardened instantly, the vulnerability from moments before locked away once more, behind the composed authority of a ruler with a kingdom to protect. Take me to him, he said. He glanced back at Elira before leaving, something unspoken passing between them. Stay close to Nora until I return, he said. Please. The word please, so simple and unfamiliar coming from a man the world called a monster, lingered in Elira's mind long after he had disappeared through the garden gate, leaving her standing alone among flowers that seemed, for the first time since her arrival, less like a strange curiosity within a fortress of fear, and more like a fragile promise of something gentler, hidden carefully beneath the surface of Blackmore's dark stone walls. She did not yet know what General Bran had found beyond the village, nor how deeply it would connect to the shadows already gathering around her from a home she had left behind. But standing there in the quiet garden, sunlight warming her face for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elira allowed herself, cautiously, to hope that whatever came next, she would not have to face it entirely alone. Nora found her a short while later, still standing among the flowers, and gently guided her back toward the eastern tower, though Elira's mind remained fixed on the soldier's urgent message. She spent the following hours pacing her room, glancing again and again toward the window, watching the tree line beyond the fortress walls for any sign of Kale's return. It was well past midday when he finally appeared, his expression grim as he climbed the tower stairs and knocked briefly before entering. You found something, Elira said, rising quickly from her seat by the window. We did, Kale said, closing the door behind him. His voice was carefully controlled, though Elira could see tension coiled tightly beneath his composed exterior. The footprints led to an abandoned hunting cabin beyond the village, roughly an hour's ride from here. Inside, Bran found signs that someone had been using it recently. Food stores, a bedroll, and this. He held out a folded piece of parchment, and Elira took it carefully, unfolding it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp and hurried, as though written in haste. She must not be allowed to remain. Watch her closely. Act when the opportunity presents itself, and ensure nothing can be traced back to the house that sent her. Elira's breath caught in her throat. This is about me, she said quietly. It appears so, Kale said, his jaw tight. Whoever left this message clearly intended for someone within Blackmore to act against you, though we do not yet know who received it. or whether they have already attempted to follow its instructions. Last night, Illyra said slowly, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The shadow near my door. It was not a random intruder. I believe not, Kale said grimly. Someone within my fortress may be working against you, following orders from beyond these walls. His eyes met hers, dark with barely restrained anger. I intend to find out who. Illyra sank slowly onto the edge of her bed, the parchment still trembling slightly in her hands. The house that sent her, she read aloud again. That can only mean Corvina. Your stepmother sent you here hoping the fortress itself would destroy you, Kale said. When it did not happen quickly enough, it seems she has decided to ensure the outcome herself. A cold, heavy anger settled over Illyra, different from the quiet resentment she had carried for years beneath Corvina's roof. This was something sharper, more immediate, the realization that her stepmother's cruelty had not ended the moment the carriage carried her away from the estate, but had instead followed her all the way to Blackmoor, reaching even into the walls meant to keep her safe. I am sorry, Kale said quietly, surprising her. This should never have been allowed to happen within my own fortress. You did not do this, Illyra said. You have no reason to apologize. I brought you into a place I promised would offer you refuge from the world that failed you, Kale said, his voice low and rough, with something that sounded almost like guilt. Instead, that same failure followed you here. That is a burden I intend to correct. He crossed the room and knelt slightly before her, bringing his eyes level with hers, an unusual gesture for a king so accustomed to commanding rooms from a position of towering authority. You are under my protection now, he said firmly. Whoever attempts to harm you, whether they come from within these walls or from the house you left behind, will answer to me directly. I give you my word. Illyra studied him carefully, searching for any trace of empty promise in his expression, but found only steady, unwavering resolve. Why? She asked softly. I am still little more than a stranger to you. Kale was quiet for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering behind his gray eyes before he answered. I am not entirely certain myself, he admitted, but since the moment you walked into my hall, something in me has refused to see you as simply a stranger. I do not yet understand it fully. I only know that I cannot ignore it. The confession hung heavily in the air between them, fragile and unfamiliar, neither of them quite prepared for the weight of it. Illyra felt her chest tighten with something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time, a warmth that frightened her nearly as much as it comforted her. Bran does not trust me, she said quietly, needing to say something to fill the silence. If word spreads that I may be the target of a conspiracy, will that not only deepen his suspicion? Bran's suspicion has always been aimed at protecting this kingdom, Kale said. Once he understands the full truth, I believe his focus will shift toward finding whoever within these walls has betrayed us, rather than doubting you. He paused, something firmer settling into his expression. Regardless of what he believes, my protection of you does not depend on his approval. A knock interrupted them before Illyra could respond, and Nora's voice called softly from the other side of the door. My king, General Bran wishes to speak with you. He says it concerns the identity of the guard who was stationed near the side entrance last night. Kale rose slowly, his expression hardening once more, into the composed authority of a ruler, with urgent matters demanding his attention. I must go, he said, but Illyra, he added, pausing at the door, please remain here, until I return. I will post additional guards outside, ones I trust personally. I understand, Illyra said. He lingered a moment longer, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her heart beat unsteadily in her chest, before finally turning and disappearing down the tower stairs, leaving her alone, with the parchment still clutched tightly in her hand, and the unsettling knowledge that Corvina's cruelty had reached far beyond the walls of the only home Illyra had ever known. She spent the remainder of the afternoon staring at the note, memorizing every hurried, sharp line of unfamiliar handwriting, wondering how many more secrets awaited discovery within Blackmoor's shadowed halls, and whether the danger following her here would ever truly be left behind. By evening, word reached her that the guard stationed near the side entrance the previous night had vanished from the fortress entirely, his quarters left hastily emptied, as though he had fled the moment suspicion began closing in around him. Whoever had received Corvina's message, it seemed, understood exactly how close the king's growing protection over Alira had come to exposing them, and had chosen flight over facing the consequences of the Alpha King's wrath. Alira sat by her window long after darkness fell, watching torchlight flicker along the fortress walls as patrols moved steadily through the night, and found herself, despite everything, grateful for the fierce, unwavering protection of a man the world called feared and cruel, but who she now understood carried a heart far gentler and far more wounded than anyone beyond these walls could possibly imagine. 3 weeks passed at Blackmoor, and with each one, Alira found herself settling into a rhythm she had never expected to find within the walls of a fortress once so terrifying to imagine. Mornings began with quiet breakfasts, sometimes alone, sometimes with Cale when his duties allowed it. Afternoons were spent exploring the parts of the fortress now open to her: the library with its endless shelves of old books, the training yard, where she often watched soldiers spar beneath the calling of instructors, and the hidden garden that had quickly become her favorite place within the cold stone walls. The missing guard had never been found, though patrols along the northern roads had turned up no further threats, and slowly, cautiously, the tension that had gripped the fortress in the days following the incident began to ease. Alira still thought of the note often, the sharp, hurried handwriting promising harm meant specifically for her. But with each day that passed without incident, the fear of it began to feel more distant, tucked carefully away, rather than sitting constantly at the front of her mind. What she had not expected, in the weeks since her arrival, was how much her understanding of Cale Draven would continue to shift with each passing day. She found him one afternoon in the training yard, sparring with General Bran, both men moving with practiced precision, wooden training swords clashing sharply in the cool autumn air. Alira paused near the edge of the yard to watch, drawn in by the raw discipline of it, the way Cale's movements carried both strength and control in equal measure. Bran caught sight of her first, calling a brief halt to the match. "Careful," he said to Cale, though his eyes were on Alira. "You have an audience." Cale turned, breathing slightly heavier from the exertion, a faint smile touching his lips at the sight of her. "Come to watch, or come to learn?" he asked. "Watch, mostly," Alira admitted, stepping closer. "Though I confess I am curious how someone learns to fight the way you do." "Years of practice," Cale said, "and a great deal of necessity." Bran studied Alira for a long moment, something in his expression softer than it had been during their first meeting weeks earlier. "The king tells me you handled yourself admirably during the council, following the incident," he said. "I confess, I misjudged the depth of your resolve." "I understand why you were cautious," Alira said honestly. "You were only trying to protect your king." Bran nodded slowly, something like respect settling into his features. "Perhaps there is more strength in you than I first realized," he said, before turning back to Cale. "We will continue this later, my king. I believe you have better company to attend to now." He left the yard with a small, knowing smile, and Cale turned fully toward Alira, setting his training sword aside. "Would you like to try?" he asked, gesturing toward the practice weapons lining the yard's edge. Alira laughed, surprised by the offer. "I have never held a sword in my life." "There is a first time for everything," Cale said, a playful glint in his gray eyes that Alira had rarely seen before. "Come, I promise to be gentle." She hesitated only a moment before crossing the yard, accepting the lightweight wooden practice sword he offered her. It felt strange and heavy in her hands, entirely unfamiliar, though Cale adjusted her grip patiently, his hands warm against hers, as he guided her fingers into proper position. "Feet apart," he instructed, knees slightly bent. "Do not grip so tightly, or your arm will tire before you land a single strike." Alira followed his instructions as best she could, and for the better part of an hour, they practiced simple movements together, Cale's patience surprising her at every turn. He laughed, genuinely and easily, when her first attempts left her stumbling awkwardly across the yard, and Alira found herself laughing along with him, something light and unguarded passing between them that felt entirely different from the cautious tension of their earlier meetings. "You are a natural disaster," Cale teased, steadying her after she nearly toppled sideways attempting a basic parry. "I told you I had never held a sword," Alira said, breathless with laughter despite herself. "You did not warn me it would be this difficult." "I did not want to discourage you before you even began," Cale said, his eyes warm with amusement, though something softer lingered beneath it, something that made Alira's chest tighten pleasantly whenever their eyes met for too long. By the time the lesson ended, both of them were breathless, and Alira felt lighter than she had, in longer than she could remember. They sat together, on a low stone bench at the edge of the training yard, sharing a water skin between them, comfortable silence settling naturally around them. "Thank you," Alira said eventually. "For what?" Kale asked. "For today," she said. "For treating me like someone worth spending an afternoon with, rather than a burden sent here as punishment." Kale's expression grew more serious, though not unkind. "You were never a burden," he said quietly. "Not from the moment you stepped into my hall. I think some part of me understood that immediately, even before I allowed myself to admit it." Alira studied him carefully, the late afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the training yard. "You still carry so much weight," she said gently. "I see it, even in moments like this, even when you laugh." Kale was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, focused on something far beyond the fortress walls. "5 years ago," he said finally, his voice low, "I lost someone I loved very deeply. Since then, I have not allowed myself to feel much of anything beyond what my duty as king requires. It has been easier that way, safer." Alira's chest tightened, remembering the portrait she had seen weeks earlier, the gentle-eyed woman standing beside a younger, softer version of the man now sitting beside her. "Lyra," she said quietly. Kale's eyes flicked to hers, surprise evident in his expression. "You know her name." "Nora told me," Alira admitted. "I did not mean to pry." "It is all right," Kale said, though the weight in his voice deepened. "She was taken from me during an attack on the border, one I was meant to prevent, and failed. I have carried that failure every day since, buried beneath duty and distance, because it was easier than facing how much it still hurts." Alira reached out slowly, resting her hand gently over his where it rested on the bench between them. "It was not your failure alone to carry," she said softly. "Grief does not mean you failed someone. It means you loved them." Kale's eyes met hers, something raw and unguarded, breaking fully through the careful walls he had built around himself for so many years. "I have not spoken of her this openly in a very long time," he admitted. "You do not have to speak of her at all, if it is too difficult," Alira said gently. "No," Kale said, turning his hand beneath hers so their fingers intertwined naturally. "I find, strangely, that I want to. With you, it does not feel like reopening a wound. It feels like finally allowing it to breathe." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun began to set beyond the fortress walls, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. Alira did not know what the coming days would bring, whether the danger following her from Corvina's estate had truly passed, or whether it still lingered somewhere just beyond sight, waiting patiently for another opportunity. But sitting there beside Kale, his hand warm and steady around hers, Alira allowed herself, for the first time since arriving at Blackmoor, to imagine a future she had never dared hope for. One where the fortress feared across every kingdom might become, instead, the first place she had ever truly called home. Neither of them noticed the figure watching quietly from the shadows of the training yard's outer wall, nor the quiet, calculating expression that crossed Osric's face as he observed the unmistakable tenderness passing between the king and the young woman who had arrived weeks earlier, as nothing more than an unwanted punishment. Whatever was growing between them, Osric understood, was no longer something that could easily be ignored, by the fortress, by the kingdom, or by the enemies still watching patiently from beyond its walls. That evening, Osric requested a private audience with Kale, finding him still in good spirits following the hours spent in the training yard. The advisor chose his words carefully, aware of how quickly his king's mood could shift when he sensed judgment aimed at matters close to his heart. "You seem lighter today, my king," Osric began, standing near the study window, as Kale reviewed a stack of reports at his desk. "Is that a concern?" Kale asked, not looking up. "Not a concern," Osric said carefully. "An observation. I have not seen you smile so freely in a very long time, not since before Lyra." Kale's hand stilled over the parchment in front of him. "Say what you mean to say, Osric." The advisor sighed, choosing his next words with obvious care. "I am glad to see you finding light again," he said honestly. "But I would be failing my duty if I did not remind you that Alira arrived here, under circumstances we still do not fully understand. The note found in the hunting cabin, the guard who vanished without explanation. These things remain unresolved. I only ask that you remain watchful, even as your heart begins to open. Kale set down the parchment, meeting Osric's gaze directly. You believe she poses a danger to me. I believe caution has kept this kingdom alive through darker days than this one, Osric said. I do not believe Alira means you harm. But I do believe whoever sent that note intended for something terrible to happen to her within these walls, and we still do not know if that threat has truly passed, or if it is simply waiting for a better opportunity. Kale was quiet for a long moment, considering the advisor's words carefully. I have already increased her protection, he said finally. Trusted guards remain near her at all times, and Bran continues investigating the missing soldier's connections. I am not blind to the danger, Osric. I simply refuse to let fear of it prevent me from allowing myself something I thought I had lost the ability to feel. Osric's expression softened slightly at that admission, the tension in his shoulders easing. Then I am glad for you, my king, he said quietly. Truly, I only wish to ensure your eyes remained open, even as your heart does the same. They are open, Kale assured him. More open than they have been in years, in more ways than one. Elsewhere in the fortress, Alira sat with Nora, in the small sitting room adjoining her tower chamber, sharing a pot of warm tea as the last light of evening faded outside the window. You seem different tonight, Nora observed, watching Alira with a knowing smile. Different how? Alira asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Lighter, Nora said. Happier, perhaps, than I have seen you since your arrival. Alira felt warmth rise in her cheeks, unable to fully suppress the small smile tugging at her lips. The king taught me to hold a sword today, she admitted. Badly, I should add. I nearly fell over more times than I can count. Nora laughed softly. That does not surprise me. Sword work takes years to master properly. But it surprises me a great deal that the king took the time to teach you at all. He has not shown interest in teaching anyone since before Lyra passed. You knew her well? Alira asked gently. Nora's expression grew thoughtful. I served her. In the years before her passing, she said. She was kind, gentle, in ways this fortress rarely sees. Losing her broke something in the king that I feared might never heal. Seeing him laugh today, truly laugh, for the first time in years, it means more than you likely realize. Alira considered this quietly, turning her teacup slowly between her hands. I do not wish to replace what he lost, she said softly. I only wish to understand him, and to be understood in return. Perhaps that is exactly what he needs, Nora said. Not someone to replace what was taken from him, but someone willing to sit patiently within the space grief has left behind, and help him remember that light still exists beyond it. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the warmth of the tea, and the quiet company easing the lingering unease that had followed Alira since the incident weeks earlier. Yet even as the evening settled peacefully around her, a small, persistent worry remained tucked at the back of her mind, the memory of sharp, hurried handwriting promising harm, and the unsettling knowledge that whoever had written those words remained, for now, entirely unaccounted for. Outside the fortress walls, beneath the cover of deepening darkness, a lone rider moved swiftly along the northern road, a sealed letter tucked carefully within his coat, bound for a destination far from Blackmoor, carrying word of everything he had witnessed that afternoon in the training yard, and everything Lady Corvina had paid him generously to discover. The horn blared across Blackmoor before sunrise, sharp and urgent, pulling every soldier from their beds and sending servants scrambling through the corridors in confusion. Alira woke with her heart hammering, the sound unlike anything she had heard since arriving at the fortress. She threw on her clothes quickly and rushed to the window, watching soldiers pour into the courtyard below, torches raised against the still dark sky. Nora burst into the room moments later, breathless and pale. There has been an attack, she said quickly. Along the eastern road, close to the village, a patrol was ambushed less than an hour ago. Alira's stomach twisted with dread. Is Kale safe? He is unharmed, Nora said. He was not with the patrol, but 2 soldiers did not survive, and 3 others are gravely wounded. The king has already ridden out to assess the damage himself. Illyra paced the small room anxiously, waiting for further word, her mind racing through everything that had happened since her arrival. The note found in the hunting cabin, the vanished guard, and now this. It felt impossible to believe these events were unconnected, though she had no proof beyond a growing, uneasy instinct. Hours passed before Cale returned, his expression grim and exhausted as he entered the war room, where Illyra had been waiting alongside Nora and several anxious servants. Bran followed close behind him, along with 2 other officers, their faces etched with the same weary tension. "Report," Osric said quickly, stepping forward as Cale removed his cloak, dark with mud, and something Illyra suspected was blood. "The northern pack struck without warning," Cale said, his voice low and controlled, despite the obvious anger simmering beneath it. "They knew exactly where our patrol would be, down to the precise hour. This was not opportunity. This was planned with information only someone close to this fortress could have provided." The room fell into tense silence at his words. Illyra felt a cold weight settle in her chest, remembering Bran's earlier suspicion that someone within Blackmoor might be working against them from the inside. "Do we know who?" Bran asked. "Not yet," Cale said, "but I intend to find out, whatever it takes." His eyes found Illyra's across the room, and something in his expression softened slightly despite the tension gripping his shoulders. "You are safe," he said, more to reassure himself than to inform her. "That is the only piece of tonight I am grateful for." "What of the wounded?" Illyra asked. "Being tended to now," Cale said. "The healers believe they will recover, though it will take time." He paused, running a tired hand through his hair, mud still clinging to his sleeve. "I lost 2 good men tonight, men who trusted me to keep this fortress secure." "This was not your failure," Illyra said firmly, echoing the words she had offered him weeks earlier in the training yard. Cale's eyes met hers, something grateful flickering behind the exhaustion. "I appreciate you saying so," he said quietly, "though it does little to ease the weight of it." The War Council continued late into the morning. Strategies debated and orders issued, patrols reorganized, and additional guards stationed along vulnerable points throughout the fortress and surrounding village. Illyra remained quietly present through most of it, though her thoughts kept drifting back to the note discovered weeks earlier, the sharp handwriting promising harm meant specifically for her, and the unsettling suspicion that the attack tonight might somehow be connected to whatever conspiracy had followed her from Corvina's estate. When the council finally dispersed, Cale found her alone in the small garden behind the fortress, seeking quiet after the chaos of the morning. He looked exhausted, dark circles shadowing his eyes, though something in his posture eased slightly at the sight of her. "You should be resting," Illyra said gently, as he sat beside her on the familiar stone bench. "I could say the same to you," Cale replied, a faint, tired smile touching his lips, "though I suspect neither of us would listen." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the quiet garden offering a brief reprieve from the tension gripping the rest of the fortress. Eventually, Cale spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "I have been thinking about the note found in the hunting cabin," he said, "and about tonight's attack. I do not believe they are unconnected." Illyra's chest tightened. "I have been thinking the same thing," she admitted. "Whoever sent that note wanted you removed from this fortress." Quietly, without drawing attention to themselves, Cale continued. "When that failed, and when it became clear that my protection of you had only grown stronger, perhaps they sought a more drastic solution, one that might destabilize the fortress enough to create the opportunity they originally hoped for." "You believe tonight's attack was meant to create chaos," Illyra said slowly, "chaos that could be used against me." "I believe it is possible," Cale said grimly, "which means whoever is working against us is patient, resourceful, and willing to sacrifice soldiers' lives to achieve their goal. That is not something I take lightly." Illyra felt a chill settle over her despite the mild afternoon air. "This is because of me," she said quietly. "Corvina's hatred has cost your soldiers their lives." "No," Cale said firmly, turning to face her directly. "This is because of whoever chose cruelty over compassion and greed over honesty. You did not choose this danger, Illyra. You did not ask to be sent here as punishment, nor did you invite the conspiracy that followed you. The responsibility for tonight's tragedy lies with those who orchestrated it, not with the woman they targeted." His words settled something anxious within her chest, though the guilt lingered regardless, a heavy, persistent weight she suspected would take considerable time to fully release. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Continue the investigation," Cale said. Bran suspects the missing guard may have connections to the Northern Pack, connections that could explain how they knew our patrol's exact movements. If we can locate him, we may finally uncover who within this fortress has been working against us. "And Corvina?" Illyra asked carefully. "Do you believe she is connected to the Northern Pack as well?" Cale's expression darkened considerably. "I do not yet know," he admitted. "But I intend to send word to trusted allies near your former estate, quietly gathering information on her recent activities. If she has formed alliances dangerous enough to threaten this fortress, I want to know the full extent of it before she has the opportunity to strike again." Illyra nodded slowly, grateful for his steady resolve, even amid the exhaustion and grief weighing so heavily upon him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for taking this so seriously, for protecting me, even when it costs you so much." Cale reached out, gently taking her hand in his exhaustion softening into something warmer as their fingers intertwined naturally, as they had weeks earlier. "You are not a burden to protect," he said quietly. "You are someone I have come to care for deeply, more deeply than I expected to allow myself to feel again. Whatever it costs, I will not allow harm to reach you while I still draw breath." The quiet intensity of his words settled warmly in Illyra's chest, chasing away some of the fear that had gripped her since the horn's urgent call had woken her before dawn. She studied his face carefully, the exhaustion etched into every line, the grief still lingering behind his gray eyes, and felt something deep and unfamiliar stirring within her own heart, a warmth she had not allowed herself to feel in longer than she could remember. "I care for you as well," she admitted quietly, the words feeling both terrifying and freeing all at once. "More than I expected to, given the circumstances that brought me here." Cale's eyes softened further, something achingly tender passing behind them. "Then perhaps," he said softly, "whatever conspiracy is working against us, we face it together, rather than allowing fear to keep either of us isolated within our own grief any longer." "Together," Illyra agreed softly, and for a brief, fragile moment, the weight of the morning's tragedy and the lingering threat of unseen enemies faded quietly into the background, replaced instead by the quiet, steady comfort of two wounded hearts, finally allowing themselves to heal in each other's presence. That evening, as the fortress settled into an uneasy calm following the day's chaos, Bran approached Cale privately, with troubling news gathered from the wounded soldiers' accounts of the attack. "One of the survivors recalled something before he lost consciousness," Bran said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. "He said their attackers spoke briefly among themselves before retreating, mentioning a name he did not recognize, Corvina." Cale's expression turned to stone. "You are certain?" "The soldier was fading fast when he spoke," Bran admitted, "but he was insistent enough that I believed it worth reporting immediately." Cale's hands clenched into tight fists at his sides, a slow, dangerous anger building steadily behind his composed exterior. "Then we finally have confirmation," he said quietly. "Whatever alliance Corvina has formed with the Northern Pack, it runs deeper than we initially feared." "What are your orders, my king?" Bran asked. Cale's eyes drifted briefly toward the eastern tower, where Illyra remained unaware of the confirmation just uncovered, before returning to Bran with renewed, unwavering resolve. "Prepare a small envoy," he said firmly. "Discreet, and heavily armed. It is time House Voss answered for the danger it has brought to my doorstep, one way or another." Beyond the fortress walls, unaware that her carefully guarded secret had finally been exposed, Lady Corvina sat once again before her mirror, reading a fresh report detailing the failed attack, her expression twisting into something cold and furious, as she began, once more, to calculate her next move against the stepdaughter she had never expected to prove quite this difficult to destroy. Night fell heavily over Blackmoor, the fortress unusually quiet after the chaos of the day, though the extra patrols Cale had ordered moved steadily along every corridor and courtyard, torches flickering against the dark stone walls. Illyra lay awake in her tower chamber, unable to settle despite her exhaustion, her mind replaying the tender words she and Cale had shared in the garden that afternoon. A soft sound near her window pulled her from her thoughts, faint enough that she almost dismissed it as the wind. She sat up slowly, listening carefully, and heard it again, a quiet scrape of something against stone, coming from just outside her window rather than the door. Her heart began pounding as she rose carefully from the bed, creeping toward the window with cautious steps. She peered out into the darkness, and saw nothing at first, only the shadowed outline of the fortress wall and the distant tree line beyond. But then a shape shifted along the narrow ledge running beneath her window, a figure dressed entirely in dark clothing, moving with deliberate, practiced silence toward her chamber. Alira's breath caught in her throat, and she backed away quickly, reaching for the small bell Nora had shown her days earlier, kept beside the bed for emergencies. Her hands trembled as she rang it as loudly as she could, the sharp sound cutting through the quiet tower. The window shattered inward a moment later, the dark-clothed figure lunging through the broken glass with startling speed. Alira screamed, stumbling backward toward the door, but the intruder closed the distance quickly, a gloved hand reaching for her before she could escape. The door burst open with tremendous force at that exact moment, and Cale filled the doorway, his eyes blazing with a fury Alira had never witnessed before, something primal and dangerous rippling just beneath his controlled exterior. He crossed the room in an instant, seizing the intruder and wrenching him away from her with terrifying strength, pinning him firmly against the stone wall. "Guards!" Cale roared, his voice carrying an authority that shook the very walls of the tower. Soldiers flooded into the room within seconds, quickly securing the intruder, while Cale turned immediately to Alira, his hands gentle despite the barely restrained fury still evident in every line of his body. "Are you harmed?" he demanded, his hands framing her face carefully, searching for any sign of injury. "I am unharmed," Alira managed, her voice shaking as the adrenaline of the moment began to fade, leaving her trembling in its wake. "He came through the window before I could do anything more than ring the bell." Cale pulled her gently against his chest, and Alira felt the rapid, unsteady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, evidence of exactly how frightened he had been in the moments before reaching her. "I felt something was wrong," he murmured against her hair, his voice rough with emotion he made no effort to hide. "I do not know how to explain it. I simply knew, the moment the bell rang, that it was you, and that I could not reach you fast enough." Alira clung to him for a long moment, allowing herself, finally, to shake with the full weight of the fear she had held back during the intruder's attack. "You reached me in time," she whispered. "That is what matters." Cale pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch entirely differently than the fear had moments before. "I do not know what I would have done," he said quietly, "if I had been even a moment too late." The guards dragged the struggling intruder from the room, and Cale reluctantly released Alira long enough to address them firmly. "Take him to the lower chambers," he ordered. "I want him questioned thoroughly by morning. I want to know who sent him, and I want to know everything he knows about Lady Corvina's involvement." The soldiers nodded and departed swiftly, leaving Cale and Alira alone once more, amid the wreckage of the shattered window, cold night air pouring steadily into the room. "You cannot stay here tonight," Cale said firmly, glancing at the broken glass scattered across the floor. "Not until this window is repaired and I am certain the tower is fully secure." "Where would I go?" Alira asked, still trembling slightly. Cale hesitated only a moment before answering. "My chambers," he said. "I will have Nora prepare a separate room nearby, if you prefer distance, but I would feel far more at ease knowing you were close tonight, given everything that has happened." Alira studied him carefully, understanding the depth of concern behind his request, and nodded slowly. "I would feel more at ease as well," she admitted honestly. He guided her carefully through the fortress corridors, his arm remaining protectively around her shoulders the entire way, guards trailing respectfully behind them at a distance. When they reached his private chambers, larger and more austere than her own tower room, he settled her gently into a chair near the fireplace, immediately building the flames higher to chase away the lingering chill of the night's events. "I owe you an explanation," Cale said quietly, settling into the chair across from her once the fire had grown steady. "About what happened tonight. About how I knew." Alira watched him carefully, curiosity temporarily overtaking the last remnants of her fear. "What do you mean?" Cale was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with obvious care. "Among my people," he said slowly, "there are bonds that form between mates, connections deeper than ordinary affection, ones that allow us to sense danger to those we are bound to. even across great distance. I felt something tonight, before the bell ever rang, a wrongness I could not ignore, pulling me toward your tower, before I fully understood why. Alira's chest tightened at his words, understanding slowly dawning, despite the exhaustion clouding her mind. You believe we share such a bond, she said quietly. I believe it is forming, Cale admitted, his gray eyes steady and unguarded in the firelight. I have felt it building since the moment you first stepped into my hall, though I fought against acknowledging it fully, uncertain whether I was ready to risk my heart again, after everything I lost with Lyra. He paused, something vulnerable passing across his face. But tonight, feeling that wrongness, that fear for your safety pulling me toward you with such overwhelming urgency, I can no longer deny what is happening between us. Alara felt tears gather unexpectedly in her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of his admission layered atop the terror of the evening's attack. I feel it too, she whispered. Something I do not fully understand, but something I know, with absolute certainty, that I do not wish to lose. Cale rose slowly, crossing the small distance between them, and knelt before her chair, taking her hands gently in his. Then let us face whatever comes next together, he said softly, as whatever this bond is asking us to become, rather than continuing to fight against it out of fear. Alira nodded, unable to find words adequate enough for the moment, and allowed him to pull her gently into his arms once more, the warmth of the fire, and the steady comfort of his embrace, slowly easing the last of the night's terror from her trembling body. Outside, beyond the thick stone walls of Blackmoor, the intruder remained locked within the fortress's lower chambers, his silence promising a difficult night of questioning ahead, and the first true opportunity Cale's forces had yet found to trace the full, dangerous reach of Lady Corvina's conspiracy back to its source. The intruder broke before sunrise, his resolve crumbling under Bran's steady, relentless questioning, and by the time Cale arrived in the lower chambers, the man had already confessed everything he knew. His name is Fenric, Bran reported, meeting Cale at the entrance to the holding cell. A mercenary hired through intermediaries, paid generously to eliminate the girl, and make it appear as though the fortress itself had failed to protect her. He claims he never met Lady Corvina directly, only received instructions and payment through a series of messengers. Did he reveal anything of the Northern Pack's involvement? Cale asked. He confirmed it, Bran said grimly. Lady Corvina has been funding their unrest for months, providing information about our patrol routes and defenses, in exchange for their cooperation in eliminating Alira. It seems your protection of her threatened whatever arrangement Corvina originally believed she was orchestrating. Cale's jaw tightened, a cold fury settling over his features. She has cost the lives of my soldiers, endangered my fortress, and attempted to murder someone under my direct protection, he said. This ends now. He returned to his chambers to find Alira awake, sitting near the window watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. She turned as he entered, searching his expression carefully. You have news, she said. Confirmation, Cale replied, settling into the chair beside her. Corvina orchestrated everything. The note, the attack on our patrol, and last night's attempt on your life. She has been working with the Northern Pack for months, trading information for their cooperation. Alira absorbed this quietly, a complicated mixture of grief and anger passing across her face. I should not be surprised, she said finally. She has hated me since my father's death. I simply never imagined she would go this far. There is something else, Cale said carefully, watching her reaction closely. Fenric mentioned something about your father's death as well. He claims to have overheard conversations, suggesting it was not entirely natural. Alira's breath caught sharply. What do you mean? He believes Corvina may have played a role in it, Cale said gently. Nothing confirmed, only rumors passed between those she has hired over the years. But given everything else we now know about her willingness to harm those in her way, I believe it warrants serious investigation. Alira sat in stunned silence for a long moment, memories of her father's sudden illness flooding back with painful clarity. The physician's confusion, the speed with which his health had deteriorated, the way Corvina had seemed almost relieved rather than grieved in the days following his passing. She had buried her suspicions deep beneath grief and survival instinct at the time, too young and too powerless to question a woman who controlled every aspect of her existence. I always wondered, she admitted quietly, tears gathering in her eyes. Some part of me always suspected something was wrong, but I told myself I was simply grieving and looking for someone to blame. Cale reached over, taking her hand gently in his. Your instincts were likely correct, he said softly. I intend to send investigators to your former estate immediately, to gather whatever evidence remains of what truly happened to your father. Whatever the truth is, Alira, you deserve to know it, and if Corvina is responsible, she will answer for it, alongside everything else she has done. Alira nodded slowly, grateful beyond words for his steady support amid the overwhelming weight of everything being uncovered. Thank you, she whispered, for believing me, even when I barely believed myself. I will always believe you, Cale said firmly. Whatever comes next, you do not face it alone. Later that morning, Alira found herself unable to remain idle, restless with the need to do something productive amid the swirling uncertainty. She sought out the fortress library, hoping to distract herself among its familiar shelves, and found Osric there instead, reviewing old records with careful attention. You seem troubled, Osric observed as she entered. I have learned a great deal this morning, Alira admitted, settling into a chair across from him. About my stepmother, about my father's death. Osric's expression grew serious. I heard the news from Bran, he said. I am sorry, truly, for the pain this discovery must be causing you. Alira studied him carefully, remembering the initial suspicion he had shown toward her weeks earlier. You doubted me when I first arrived, she said, not unkindly, simply observing. I did, Osric admitted honestly. It is my duty to protect the king, and unfamiliar faces arriving under mysterious circumstances have historically brought this fortress more harm than good. I make no apology for my caution, though I will admit I am glad to have been wrong about you specifically. What changed your mind? Alira asked, curious. Osric considered the question thoughtfully before answering. Watching how you conducted yourself, even under suspicion, he said. Watching how the king has changed since your arrival, in ways I did not believe possible after everything he lost with Lyra. A person capable of inspiring such genuine change is rarely someone acting with hidden malice. Alira felt warmth rise in her chest at his words, grateful for the acknowledgement. I only wish to help him, she said quietly, as much as he has helped me since I arrived here. I believe you, Osric said simply, and I believe, whatever conspiracy your stepmother has built against you, the king will not rest until it has been fully dismantled. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps, and Nora appeared in the library doorway, breathless and urgent. Alira, the king requests your presence immediately, she said. Investigators have returned from the Voss estate, with information he believes you should hear directly. Alira's heart pounded as she followed Nora quickly through the fortress corridors, her mind racing with possibilities, both hopeful and terrifying. She found Cale waiting in the war room once more, accompanied by two investigators she did not recognize, their expressions grave. What have you found? She asked immediately, unable to wait for formal introductions. One of the investigators stepped forward, holding a small leather journal in his hands. We searched your father's former study thoroughly, my lady, he said. Hidden within a false compartment in his desk, we discovered this. It appears to be a personal journal, detailing concerns he held in the final weeks before his death. Alira accepted the journal with trembling hands, recognizing her father's familiar handwriting immediately, the sight of it bringing sudden, overwhelming tears to her eyes. She opened it carefully, scanning the final entries, her breath catching as she read. Corvina grows increasingly hostile toward my methods of managing the estate's finances. I have discovered discrepancies, suggesting she has been diverting funds toward purposes I cannot identify. I fear confronting her directly may prove dangerous, though I intend to raise the matter regardless, for the sake of Alira's future security. If anything should happen to me, I pray she finds these words, and understands that her father loved her beyond measure, and suspected far more than he ever dared speak aloud. Alira's hands shook as she finished reading, the confirmation of her deepest, most painful suspicion settling heavily over her heart. He knew, she whispered. He suspected her, and days later, he was gone. Cale moved to her side immediately, wrapping a steady arm around her shoulders as she struggled against overwhelming grief. This confirms enough for formal charges to be brought against her, he said gently. Combined with Fenric's testimony and the evidence of her involvement with the Northern Pack, Corvina will answer for everything she has done, including whatever role she played in your father's death. Elira leaned into his support, grateful for his steady presence amid the crushing weight of grief and long-buried anger, finally given permission to surface fully. "I want to see her face what she has done," she said quietly, her voice hardening with newfound resolve. "I want her to understand that she never truly succeeded in destroying me, no matter how hard she tried." "She will," Cale promised firmly, his own voice carrying the weight of a king's unwavering resolve. "I intend to see to it personally." As evening fell over Blackmoor once more, Elira sat alone in the quiet garden, her father's journal held carefully in her lap, finally allowing herself the space to grieve fully for the loss she had never been permitted to properly mourn. Cale found her there as darkness settled, taking a seat quietly beside her without a word, simply offering his steady presence as she worked through the painful weight of everything the day had revealed. "Thank you for staying with me," she said eventually, resting her head gently against his shoulder. "There is nowhere else I would rather be," Cale replied softly, pressing a gentle kiss against her hair. "Not now, not ever again." Beneath the darkening sky, surrounded by the quiet garden that had become her refuge within Blackmoor's cold stone walls, Elira allowed herself, finally, to believe that justice for her father and safety for herself were no longer distant, impossible hopes, but promises steadily becoming reality within the protective embrace of a king who had shown her, again and again, that love could exist, even in a world built from grief and fear. "There is something I have never told anyone outside my closest advisors," Cale said quietly, after a long, comfortable silence had settled between them. "About the night Lyra died." Elira lifted her head from his shoulder, studying his profile carefully in the fading light. "You do not have to share it, if it is too painful." "I want to," Cale said, his voice steady, despite the vulnerability evident beneath it. "I have carried it alone for 5 years. I find myself wanting to set it down, finally, with someone I trust." Elira remained quiet, giving him the space to continue at his own pace. "The attack that killed her was not random," Cale said slowly. "For years, I believed it was simply the Northern Pack testing our borders, the same unrest we have dealt with ever since. But recently, piecing together fragments of information gathered during our investigation into Corvina, I have begun to suspect the attack that killed Lyra may have been orchestrated by the same network of alliances Corvina has been cultivating for years." Elira's breath caught. "You believe they are connected?" "I cannot yet prove it," Cale admitted, "but the timing, the methods, the sudden withdrawal of attackers immediately after achieving their goal, all of it mirrors what happened during the attack on our patrol weeks ago. If Corvina's network extends back that far, then she may bear responsibility, not only for your father's death, but for Lyra's as well." Elira reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "If that is true," she said softly, "then we have both lost someone we loved to the same cruelty, years apart, without ever knowing our paths would eventually cross because of it." Cale turned to face her fully, something profound passing behind his gray eyes. "Perhaps that is why the bond between us formed so quickly," he said quietly. "Perhaps some part of us recognized, even before we understood the full truth, that we were both carrying wounds inflicted by the same darkness, and that healing might be found more easily together than apart." Elira leaned into him, resting her forehead gently against his. "Whatever the truth turns out to be," she said, "I am grateful, more than I can express, that it led me here, to you." They remained together in the quiet garden, long after darkness fully claimed the sky, neither willing to disturb the fragile, healing peace that had settled between them. Far beyond Blackmoor's walls, within the familiar halls of the Voss estate, Lady Corvina received word of the investigator's visit with poorly concealed alarm, pacing her chamber, while Lena and Marta watched anxiously from the doorway. "They found the journal," Corvina muttered, more to herself than to her daughters. "I searched that study myself, after his death. I was certain nothing remained that could implicate me." "Mother, if they have proof," Lena said carefully, "perhaps it would be wiser to flee, before the king's forces arrive." Corvina's eyes flashed with cold fury. "I did not spend years building this life only to abandon it, because a foolish girl and her monster king believe they have uncovered enough to accuse me, she snapped. There are still alliances I can call upon, ones far more dangerous than a handful of hired mercenaries. She turned toward the window, her expression hardening into something calculating and desperate all at once. If subtlety has failed, then we will simply need a different approach entirely. Marta's voice trembled as she asked the question. Neither of her sisters dared voice aloud. What kind of approach, Mother? Corvina's cold smile returned, sharp and unsettling in the dim candlelight. The kind that ensures the king himself understands precisely what it means to cross House Voss, she said quietly. Whatever love has grown between him and that ungrateful girl, it will make an excellent weapon, once I decide exactly how best to use it against them both. A messenger arrived at Blackmoor mid-morning, breathless from hard riding, carrying word that sent an immediate wave of tension through the fortress. House Voss has fled, he reported to Kale and Bran in the war room, Illyra standing quietly nearby. By the time our forces arrived at the estate to formally question Lady Corvina, she and her daughters were already gone. Servants report she departed in haste 2 nights ago, taking only a small escort and whatever valuables could be carried quickly. Kale's expression darkened considerably. Fled where? Unknown, my king, the messenger admitted, though several servants mentioned overhearing talk of the northern territories before her departure. Bran's jaw tightened. If she is seeking refuge with the pack she has been funding, this complicates matters significantly. It suggests she believes their alliance strong enough to shelter her from the consequences of her actions. Then we will need to be prepared to meet that alliance directly, Kale said firmly, though Illyra could see the weight of the news settling heavily behind his controlled exterior. After the messenger departed to rest, Illyra found herself standing quietly beside Kale, near the war room's tall windows, watching gray clouds gather over the distant tree line. She has escaped accountability again, she said softly, old, familiar frustration creeping into her voice. Just as she always has. Not escaped, Kale corrected gently, turning to face her. Delayed, perhaps, but her network is not limitless, and her resources are not endless. Wherever she has fled, we will find her, and when we do, she will finally answer for everything she has done. Illyra nodded, though the uncertainty of it all weighed heavily on her heart. Weeks of investigation, confirmation, and painful revelation had brought her closer to the truth than she ever imagined possible, yet the promise of true justice still felt frustratingly distant. Kale studied her expression carefully, something gentle and determined settling into his own features. Come with me, he said, extending his hand. There is something I wish to show you, something that may help, even if only a little, during this difficult waiting. Curious despite her weariness, Illyra accepted his hand, allowing him to lead her from the war room, through familiar corridors, and finally up a narrow staircase she had not yet explored, one leading toward a high tower overlooking the entire fortress, and the forests stretching endlessly beyond it. The view from the tower's summit stole her breath entirely, the late afternoon sun breaking through scattered clouds to illuminate the landscape in shifting patches of gold and shadow. Blackmoor's dark stone walls looked almost beautiful from this height, less like a fortress built to frighten, and more like a guardian standing watch over the land it protected. This was Lyra's favorite place, Kale said quietly, standing beside her at the tower's edge. She used to say, the view reminded her that even the darkest places could hold something worth protecting, worth loving. Illyra glanced at him carefully, moved by the trust required to share such a personal memory. Thank you for showing me this, she said softly. I did not bring you here only to share memories of the past, Kale said, turning to face her fully, something nervous and earnest, flickering behind his usual composed authority. I brought you here because I wish to speak with you about something far more important to our future. Illyra's heart began beating faster, uncertain what was coming, though something in his expression filled her with cautious, hopeful anticipation. Among my people, Kale continued, his voice steady, despite the vulnerability evident beneath it. When the bond between mates grows strong enough, there exists a ritual, a mark exchanged between two hearts choosing to commit fully to one another, deeper than any spoken vow. It is not something entered into lightly, nor something I ever expected to consider again after losing Lyra. He paused, reaching for both of Illyra's hands, holding them gently between his own. But since the moment you arrived at Blackmoor, Everything I believed about my own capacity for love has been challenged, reshaped, and ultimately restored, entirely because of you. I do not offer this lightly, Alira. I offer it because I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Alira felt tears gather in her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion carried within his words. Are you asking me to accept this bond? She asked softly, hardly daring to believe it. I am, Cale confirmed, his gray eyes steady and open in a way she had rarely witnessed before. Not because circumstance has thrown us together, not because duty or danger demands it, but because I have come to love you, Alira, more fiercely and more completely than I ever believed myself capable of feeling again. The words settled deeply into Alira's heart, chasing away every lingering doubt, every fear that the tenderness growing between them might somehow prove fleeting or unreal. I love you as well, she whispered, the admission feeling both terrifying and utterly right, all at once. More than I know how to properly express. Cale's expression softened into something achingly tender, relief and joy mingling openly across his features. Then will you accept this bond? He asked quietly. Will you choose to walk beside me, not as tribute, not as guest, but as my equal, my mate, for as long as we both shall live? Yes, Alira answered without hesitation, the single word carrying the full weight of everything she had come to feel since arriving at Blackmore weeks earlier. Yes, Cale, I choose you, completely and without reservation. Cale's eyes shone with unmistakable emotion as he gently cupped her face in his hands, drawing her closer. The bonding mark requires both willingness and trust, he explained softly. It will connect us in ways deeper than words can fully capture, allowing each of us to sense the other's presence, their well-being, no matter the distance between us. It is permanent, Alira. Once given, it cannot be undone. I understand, Alira said, meeting his eyes steadily. I want this. I want you, entirely, in every way this bond allows. With gentle reverence, Cale guided her closer, pressing a soft, lingering kiss against her lips, warmth and tenderness passing between them, in a way that felt like coming home, after a lifetime spent searching for a place that never truly existed until now. When he finally pulled back, his eyes held a quiet request, and Alira nodded softly, understanding, without needing further explanation. He pressed his lips gently against the curve of her shoulder, and Alira felt an unusual, warm sensation spread through her entire body, something deeper than physical touch, a connection settling into place that felt as natural and essential as breathing itself. When he finally lifted his head, something had shifted between them, an invisible thread now binding their hearts together in a way neither distance nor danger could easily sever. I feel you, Alira whispered in wonder, pressing a hand gently against her own chest. Something steady, warm, entirely new. As I feel you, Cale said softly, wonder evident in his own voice as well. This is what I lost, all those years ago, and never believed I would find the courage to seek again. They stood together atop the tower as the sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon, wrapped in comfortable silence and the quiet, steady warmth of a bond neither of them had expected to find, yet both now embraced fully and without reservation. Whatever comes next, Cale said eventually, Corvina attempts. Whatever Corvina attempts, whatever danger still lingers beyond these walls, we face it now as truly bonded partners. Nothing she does can sever what we have just chosen together. Alira leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, as the last light of day painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and violet. Let her try, she said quietly, newfound strength settling firmly into her voice. I am no longer the frightened girl who arrived here weeks ago, sent as punishment by a woman who believed she could destroy me simply by casting me away. I am stronger now. We are stronger. Together. Cale pressed a gentle kiss against her hair, holding her close, as darkness slowly claimed the sky above Blackmore. Together, he echoed softly, the word carrying the full weight of everything they had built between them, and everything still waiting to be faced in the days ahead. Word of the bonding spread quietly through the fortress by the following morning, met with genuine celebration among those who had watched their king carry grief alone for far too many years. Nora wept happy tears when she heard the news, embracing Alira warmly before helping her prepare for the day. Even Bran offered a rare, genuine smile of approval when he encountered them together in the corridor, a silent acknowledgement of how thoroughly his earlier suspicions had been replaced by respect and quiet gladness. Only Osric's expression carried a trace of lingering concern amid the widespread joy, a careful awareness that Corvina's flight toward the northern territories, combined with the deepening bond between Kale and Alira, likely meant the most dangerous chapter of this conflict still waited ahead of them, rather than safely behind. He kept his concerns quiet for now, unwilling to dim the well-deserved happiness surrounding the newly bonded couple, though he made certain, before the day's end, that every patrol along Blackmoor's borders had been doubled once more, and that every guard remained fully alert to whatever danger Lady Corvina might yet attempt to bring to their doorstep. That evening, Kale surprised Alira with a small gathering held in the Great Hall, nothing as grand as a formal celebration, but warm and heartfelt regardless, filled with soft candlelight and the quiet laughter of those closest to them within the fortress. Nora had arranged simple flowers throughout the hall, and the kitchen staff had prepared a modest feast, clearly delighted by the opportunity to celebrate something joyful after weeks of tension and uncertainty. "I did not expect this," Alira said, looking around the transformed hall in wonder as Kale led her inside, his hand warm and steady around hers. "You deserve far more than this simple gathering," Kale said softly, "but given everything still unresolved beyond these walls, I thought it wise to celebrate quietly for now, and promise you something grander once true peace has been restored." "This is more than enough," Alira assured him, squeezing his hand gently. "I have never had much reason to celebrate in recent years. This alone feels like more joy than I know how to hold." They moved through the gathering together, Bran offering gruff but genuine congratulations, Osric bowing formally, before allowing himself a rare, warm smile, and Nora embracing Alira tightly, whispering how happy she was to see both Kale and Alira finally finding light after so much darkness. Later, as the gathering wound down, and most had retired for the evening, Kale and Alira remained in the Great Hall, sitting together near the dying fire, the bonding mark still humming quietly beneath the surface of their connection, a steady warmth neither of them had grown tired of feeling. "I have been thinking about what comes next," Kale said eventually, his voice thoughtful. "Beyond simply defending against Corvina's remaining threats, I have been thinking about what kind of future I wish to build, now that I finally have someone I wish to build it alongside." "What kind of future do you imagine?" Alira asked curiously, resting her head against his shoulder. "One where Blackmoor is no longer known only for the fear it inspires," Kale said. "I became the ruler this kingdom needed during a difficult, dangerous era, and I do not regret the strength required to protect my people. But I would like Blackmoor to become known for more than that, eventually, for fairness, for the kind of steady, quiet strength that does not need cruelty to command respect." Alira smiled softly, moved by the vision he described. "I would like that as well," she said. "I spent so many years believing my only worth was in how much hardship I could silently endure. I would like to help build something different here, something that reminds people that strength and kindness are not opposites. Together, I believe we could accomplish exactly that," Kale said, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead. "Once Corvina's threat has finally been resolved, I intend to formally announce our bonding before the entire kingdom and begin the process of properly making you my queen, in title as well as in heart." Alira's breath caught at the weight of his words, the reality of the life unfolding before her still feeling almost too remarkable to fully believe. "I never imagined a future like this for myself," she admitted softly. "Not during all those years scrubbing floors, wondering if I would ever escape Corvina's cruelty. Certainly not becoming a queen. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it," Kale said gently. "I certainly never imagined finding love again after Lyra. Yet here you are, and I could not imagine my life without you now, even if I tried." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the fire slowly burn down to gentle embers, both of them acutely aware of the steady, warm presence of the bond now connecting their hearts, a quiet promise of everything still waiting to unfold between them. Eventually, Kale rose, offering his hand to help Alira to her feet. "Come," he said softly. "Tomorrow will bring whatever challenges Corvina still intends to throw against us. Tonight, let us simply rest, grateful for what we have already found together." Elira accepted his hand, allowing him to guide her from the quiet hall toward their shared chambers, the warmth of the bonding mark humming steadily beneath her skin, a constant, comforting reminder that whatever darkness still lingered beyond Blackmore's walls, she would never again have to face it entirely alone. As they walked together through the torchlit corridors, neither of them noticed the raven perched silently upon a distant tower ledge, its dark eyes watching the fortress with unusual, unnatural stillness, before finally taking flight into the night sky, carrying word northward of everything it had observed within Blackmore's walls that evening. The peace that had settled over Blackmore in the days following the bonding did not last. It was Bran who brought the news, striding into the war room with an urgency that immediately silenced the quiet morning conversation Chaol and Elira had been sharing over breakfast. "My king, scouts report movement along the northern border," he said. "A significant force, larger than anything we have seen from the pack before. They are moving toward Blackmore directly." Chaol rose immediately, his expression hardening into the composed authority Elira had first witnessed weeks ago in the Great Hall. "Numbers? Difficult to determine precisely," Bran admitted, "but scouts estimate at least 3 times the size of any previous incursion. And my king, there is something else." Riders spotted a woman traveling with the northern forces, matching the description of Lady Corvina. Elira's stomach twisted sharply. "She is leading them here herself." "It appears so," Bran confirmed grimly. Chaol's jaw tightened, a cold, controlled fury settling over his features. "Prepare the fortress for defense," he ordered. "Full garrison, every available soldier stationed along the walls. I want messengers sent to our allies immediately, requesting reinforcement." He turned to Elira, his expression softening slightly, despite the tension gripping the room. "You will remain within the fortress's inner chambers, protected at all times." "I will not hide while you face this danger," Elira said firmly, though fear tightened her voice despite her resolve. "This threat exists because of Corvina's hatred toward me. I will not simply retreat and leave others to face it in my place." "Elira," Chaol began, concern evident in his tone. "I am not asking to fight on the front lines," Elira interrupted gently, though firmly. "But I refuse to hide entirely while everyone I care about risks their lives below. Let me help in whatever way I safely can. Tending to the wounded, organizing supplies, anything that allows me to contribute rather than simply wait helplessly." Chaol studied her for a long moment, torn between his protective instincts and his respect for her determination. Finally, he nodded slowly. "You may assist the healers," he said. "But you will remain within the fortress's central chambers at all times, and you will have guards with you constantly. I cannot lose you, Elira. Not now, not after everything we have finally found together." "You will not lose me," Elira promised, though the uncertainty of the coming battle weighed heavily between them both. The fortress transformed rapidly over the following hours, soldiers moving with practiced urgency along the walls, supplies gathered and organized, healers preparing their stations for whatever wounded the coming conflict might bring. Elira worked alongside Nora and the fortress healers, her hands steady, despite the anxious pounding of her heart, grateful for the distraction of purposeful work amid the mounting tension. By late afternoon, the northern forces had come into view along the distant tree line, a dark mass of soldiers and banners that sent a fresh wave of dread through the fortress. Chaol stood atop the main wall, Bran and Osric at his side, watching the approaching force with grim, calculating focus. "They intend to lay siege," Bran observed. "Their numbers suggest confidence, though not necessarily strength sufficient to breach these walls outright." "Corvina has convinced them this fight is worth the risk," Chaol said. "Whatever promises she has made, whatever alliance she has built, she clearly believes it strong enough to finally accomplish what her hired mercenaries and secret conspiracies could not." As dusk approached, a small envoy broke away from the northern force, riding closer to the fortress gates, under a banner of parley. Chaol descended to meet them personally, Elira watching anxiously from a window in the central keep, her heart in her throat, as she recognized the figure riding at the envoy's center. Corvina looked different than Elira remembered, her expression sharper, more desperate beneath its careful composure, though her eyes still carried the same cold calculation that had haunted Elira's childhood. She stopped a safe distance from the gate, addressing Chaol directly. "Alpha King," Corvina called, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "I have not come seeking unnecessary bloodshed. I have come to offer you a simple choice. Return my stepdaughter to my custody, and my allies will withdraw peacefully. Refuse, and you condemn both your fortress and everyone within it to the consequences of your stubbornness." Kale's expression remained coldly composed, though Elira could sense, even from this distance, the barely contained fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "Elira is no longer yours to claim," he called back, his voice carrying easily across the field between them. "She is bonded to me, protected by my kingdom, and beyond your reach permanently. Withdraw your forces now, and I will consider allowing you to leave this confrontation alive, despite everything you have already done." Corvina's expression twisted with fury at his refusal. "You have no idea what you have chosen to protect," she called back, venom lacing every word. "That girl has been nothing but trouble since the day she was born. If you insist on standing between me and what I have come to reclaim, then you leave me no choice but to take it by force." "Then you have made your choice," Kale said coldly, turning away from the parley without further discussion, signaling to his archers stationed along the wall. Corvina retreated quickly back toward her forces, and within moments, the northern army began advancing steadily toward Blackmoor's walls, war horns sounding across the darkening field. Elira watched from the window, her heart pounding as the first wave of the assault began, arrows arcing through the darkening sky, the distant clash of metal against metal echoing ominously across the fortress grounds. She forced herself away from the window eventually, returning to the healer's station, where wounded soldiers had already begun arriving, their injuries a grim reminder of the price being paid to protect the bond she and Kale had chosen together. The battle raged through much of the night, Blackmoor's walls holding firm against wave after wave of the northern assault, Kale's forces fighting with disciplined precision, honed through years of preparation for exactly this kind of threat. Elira worked tirelessly alongside the healers, tending to wounds, offering comfort to frightened soldiers, her earlier fear slowly transforming into steady, determined purpose. Near midnight, a soldier burst into the healer's station, his expression urgent. "The king requests word be sent that the northern forces are beginning to falter," he reported. "Our defenses are holding, but Lady Corvina has broken away from the main assault, attempting to circle toward a weaker point along the eastern wall, near the old servants' entrance." Elira's blood ran cold. The eastern entrance sat dangerously close to the central keep, close enough that a determined, desperate individual might find a path toward the very chambers meant to keep her safe. "Does the king know?" she asked urgently. "He has been informed," the soldier confirmed. "Additional guards have been dispatched to secure the entrance immediately." Despite the reassurance, an uneasy feeling settled deep in Elira's chest, one she could not fully shake as she returned to her work among the wounded, praying silently that Kale's forces would hold, and that whatever desperate plan Corvina still intended to attempt would fail before it could bring further harm to the fortress and the people within it that Elira had come to care for so deeply. Outside, beneath the chaos of battle and the flickering light of torches and distant fires, Lady Corvina moved carefully through the shadows near the eastern wall, a small, loyal escort at her side, her expression set with the same cold, desperate determination that had driven her relentlessly toward this moment for weeks. Whatever the outcome of the larger battle raging behind her, she intended to ensure that this confrontation ended exactly as she had always envisioned, with her stepdaughter finally, permanently removed from the life that had somehow, impossibly, grown far beyond anything Corvina had ever intended to allow her to have. The guards Kale had dispatched reached the eastern entrance moments before Corvina's small party arrived, forming a firm, disciplined line across the narrow passage leading toward the central keep. Corvina halted at the sight of them, her escort tensing at her side, though her expression barely flickered with surprise. "Stand aside," she commanded, her voice carrying the same cold authority she had used for years to control her household. "This matter does not concern soldiers sworn to a king who has no true claim over what belongs to House Voss." "You have no authority here, my lady," the lead guard replied firmly, his stance unwavering. "By order of the king, you are to be detained immediately." Corvina's expression twisted with fury, though something calculating flickered behind her eyes as she studied the guards blocking her path. "Very well," she said coldly, before nodding sharply to the escort beside her. What followed happened quickly, her escort surging forward in a coordinated attempt to break through the guard's line, chaos erupting in the narrow passage as steel met steel beneath the flickering torchlight. Word reached the central keep within minutes, and Cale abandoned his position along the main wall the moment he heard, sprinting through the fortress with a speed that left even his most seasoned soldiers struggling to keep pace. Inside the healer's station, Elira froze at the sound of shouting growing louder somewhere beyond the keep's inner walls, her heart pounding as she recognized the unmistakable clash of nearby combat. Nora grabbed her arm quickly, pulling her toward a more protected inner chamber. "Stay here," Nora urged. "The guards will handle this." But Elira could not simply wait passively while chaos unfolded so close to where she stood, especially not when some deep, instinctive part of her, perhaps some echo of the bond now connecting her to Cale, told her that he was moving closer to danger with every passing second. She slipped past Nora's protective grip, moving cautiously toward the sound of fighting despite every warning screaming through her mind to remain hidden. She reached a narrow corridor overlooking the eastern passage just as Cale arrived at the scene below, his expression thunderous as he took in the sight of his guards locked in combat against Corvina's escort. "Enough," Cale's voice thundered across the passage, carrying such absolute authority that even the chaos of combat seemed to falter momentarily in response. Corvina's remaining escort hesitated, several immediately dropping their weapons at the sheer force of his presence, understanding instinctively that continued resistance against the Alpha King himself carried consequences far graver than anything they had bargained for. Corvina alone remained defiant, backing slowly toward the shadows of the passage, her eyes darting desperately for any remaining path of escape. "This is not finished," she spat, though her voice carried more desperation now than genuine confidence. "You may have won tonight, but House Voss does not simply disappear because a king with delusions of righteousness decides to play protector. House Voss ended the moment you chose murder and conspiracy over the family you were meant to protect," Cale said coldly, advancing steadily toward her despite her attempts to retreat. "Whatever remains of your ambitions dies here, tonight." Elira watched from above, her heart pounding, as guards closed in around Corvina's remaining position, the woman's desperate expression finally cracking under the weight of inevitable capture. For a brief, suspended moment, it seemed the confrontation might end there, quietly, with Corvina finally facing the justice she had evaded for so long. But then, in a final, desperate act, Corvina lunged suddenly toward a fallen soldier's discarded blade, her intention unmistakable even from the distance separating her from Cale. Elira's breath caught sharply in her throat, a cry of warning rising instinctively to her lips, though she knew, even as she called out, that the distance between them might prove too great to matter. "Cale!" she screamed, her voice cutting sharply through the chaos below. Whether it was her warning, or simply the deep, instinctive awareness carried through the bond now connecting them, Cale moved with startling speed, closing the distance and disarming Corvina before her desperate strike could reach anywhere near its intended target. She crumpled to the ground beneath his overwhelming strength, finally, fully subdued, her schemes and desperate ambitions ending at last in the cold, torchlit passage of the very fortress she had once hoped would destroy the stepdaughter she despised. Elira sagged with relief against the corridor railing above, her legs trembling beneath her as the adrenaline of the moment slowly began to fade. Nora arrived beside her moments later, wrapping a steadying arm around her shoulders. "It is over," Nora said softly, watching the guards below secure Corvina fully, binding her hands as she continued muttering furious, desperate protests that no longer held any real power to threaten anyone within Blackmoor's walls. But even as relief washed over her, Elira understood, watching Cale issue calm, steady orders to his soldiers below, that the larger battle still raging beyond the fortress walls remained far from finished, and that whatever remained of the northern forces still needed to be fully addressed before true peace could finally settle over Blackmoor once more. Dawn broke over Blackmoor to reveal a battlefield finally falling silent, the northern forces retreating in scattered disarray, once word spread of their patron's capture within the fortress walls. Cale stood atop the main wall, watching the last of the retreating soldiers disappear beyond the tree line, exhaustion evident in every line of his body, though relief settled steadily over his features as the true scale of their victory became clear. Bran approached quietly, his own expression carrying the weary satisfaction of a battle successfully weathered. "They are withdrawing fully, my king," Bran reported. "Without Corvina's promised support and resources, their commanders have lost the will to continue this assault. I believe we have seen the last of organized aggression from the Northern Pack, at least for the foreseeable future." "Casualties?" Cale asked, his voice heavy with the weight of command. "Significant, but far fewer than we feared," Bran said. "The healers report most wounds are treatable, and our losses, while painful, are far lighter than what a siege of this scale might have cost us under different circumstances." Cale nodded slowly, gratitude and exhaustion mingling within him as he finally allowed himself a moment to fully absorb the reality of the battle's end. "And Corvina?" "Secured in the lower chambers," Bran confirmed, "awaiting whatever judgment you deem appropriate." Cale descended from the wall soon after, making his way immediately toward the healer's station, where he found Alira still working tirelessly among the wounded, despite the visible exhaustion etched across her own features. She looked up as he entered, relief flooding her expression at the sight of him unharmed. "It is over," he said simply, crossing the room to pull her gently into his arms. Alira sagged against him, the full weight of the night's tension finally beginning to release from her trembling body. "Truly over?" she asked softly. "The northern forces are retreating," Cale confirmed. "And Corvina is secured, awaiting judgment." He pulled back slightly, studying her face carefully. "You are exhausted. You should rest." "So should you," Alira replied, though she made no argument beyond that observation, too weary to resist the comfort of his steady embrace any longer. They retired together to their chambers, as the fortress slowly began settling into the exhausted, grateful quiet that follows any hard-won victory, sleep claiming them both quickly, despite the significant matters still awaiting resolution once they woke. It was well past midday when Alira finally stirred, finding Cale already awake beside her, watching her with a soft, tender expression that made her chest tighten with warmth, despite the exhaustion still lingering in her body. "You let me sleep," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "You earned the rest," Cale replied, brushing a gentle hand across her cheek. "You worked tirelessly through the entire battle, tending to soldiers who owe you a debt of gratitude they may never fully be able to repay." Alira flushed slightly at the praise, though the warmth of his words settled comfortably within her chest. "I only did what needed to be done," she said. "As did you." They rose together eventually, preparing for the difficult matter still awaiting resolution below. Cale had ordered Corvina brought before a formal tribunal that afternoon, gathering his most trusted advisors, along with representatives from the surrounding villages who had suffered under the Northern Pack's repeated aggression over the years. Alira stood beside Cale, as Corvina was led into the great hall, her wrists bound, her once immaculate appearance, now disheveled and worn, from her night spent in the lower chambers. Yet despite her circumstances, Corvina's expression still carried traces of the same cold defiance that had defined her for as long as Alira could remember. "Lady Corvina of House Voss," Osric announced formally, standing beside the tribunal's assembled officials. "You stand accused of conspiracy against the crown, orchestration of murder, funding an alliance with hostile forces against this kingdom, and suspected involvement in the death of Lord Edwin Voss. How do you answer these charges?" Corvina's eyes swept the room slowly before settling finally on Alira, something unreadable flickering behind her cold gaze. "I answer that I did what was necessary to protect what remained of my family's position," she said, her voice carrying none of the desperation from the previous night, replaced instead by a kind of resigned, bitter pride. "Edwin grew weak in his final years, questioning decisions that secured our family's survival, and that girl," she continued, gesturing toward Alira with obvious disdain, "was never more than a burden inherited through marriage, a constant reminder of a life I never truly wished to lead." "You admit, then, to your role in Lord Voss's death?" Osric pressed. Corvina's jaw tightened, though after a long, tense pause, she finally nodded once, sharply. "He discovered discrepancies in the estate's finances," she admitted. "Funds I had been diverting for years, building the alliances necessary to secure my daughter's futures, in a world that offers women precious little security otherwise. When he threatened to expose me, I ensured his silence permanently, through means a discreet physician was well compensated to overlook." A heavy silence fell across the hall at her cold, matter-of-fact confession. Illyra felt tears gather in her eyes, the confirmation of her father's murder finally spoken aloud after years of suspicion and buried grief, the weight of it settling both painfully and, in some strange way, with a measure of long-awaited relief. And your continued campaign against Illyra, following her exile to this fortress, Osric continued. She survived when I expected the king to dispose of her quickly, Corvina said with a bitter, humorless laugh. When that failed, I could not allow her to remain a threat, capable of eventually uncovering everything I had worked so carefully to hide. Every action I took afterward was simply an extension of ensuring my own survival and my daughter's continued security. Cale's expression had grown increasingly cold throughout Corvina's testimony, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. When she finished speaking, he stepped forward, addressing the tribunal directly. You have heard her own confession, he said, his voice carrying absolute authority across the silent hall. Murder of a noble lord. Conspiracy against this kingdom. Repeated attempts against the life of someone under my direct protection, and now bonded to me as my mate. The evidence and confession before us leave no room for leniency. He turned to address Corvina directly, his gray eyes cold and unwavering. You will be stripped of all noble title and holdings, effective immediately. House Voss, and whatever remains of its estate, will be transferred fully into Illyra's control, as the rightful and only remaining heir. You will spend the remainder of your life imprisoned within the northern fortress, far from any opportunity to threaten this kingdom, or the woman you tried so relentlessly to destroy, ever again. Corvina's composed defiance finally cracked at the pronouncement, her expression twisting with fury and disbelief. You cannot simply hand my family's legacy to that ungrateful girl, she snarled, straining against the guards holding her. Your family's legacy ended the moment you chose murder and betrayal over the daughter you were meant to protect, Cale said coldly. Whatever legacy remains now belongs entirely to Illyra, and to the future she chooses to build, free from the cruelty you have inflicted upon her for far too long. Corvina was led away shortly after, her furious protests echoing faintly through the fortress halls until finally fading into silence, leaving behind a heavy but strangely peaceful quiet within the great hall. Illyra remained still for a long moment after her stepmother's departure, overwhelmed by the sudden, dizzying weight of everything just decided. Cale turned to her gently, taking her hands in his. Are you well? He asked softly. I do not know what I feel, Illyra admitted honestly, tears finally slipping freely down her cheeks. Relief, grief, something almost like freedom, finally, after years of feeling trapped beneath her cruelty. All of those feelings are valid, Cale said gently, pulling her into a warm, steady embrace. You do not need to choose only one. You have carried this pain for far too long, Illyra. Whatever you feel now, in this moment, allow yourself to feel it fully. Illyra wept quietly against his chest, years of buried grief and fear, finally releasing in the safety of his steady arms, while around them, the fortress slowly began settling into a genuine, hard-won peace, unlike anything Blackmore had known in years. Later that evening, as the sun set gently over the fortress walls, Nora found Illyra sitting once again in the quiet garden that had become her favorite refuge since arriving weeks earlier. She carried a small, wrapped bundle carefully in her hands. This arrived for you, Nora said softly, handing it over. From the estate. It seems word has already spread of today's tribunal, and the household staff wished you to have this immediately. Illyra unwrapped the bundle carefully, discovering a simple, worn locket inside, one she recognized instantly from her childhood, a gift her father had given her mother years before her passing, one Illyra had believed lost forever amid Corvina's cruel reorganization of the estate following her father's death. She opened it with trembling fingers, finding a small portrait of her parents together, young and happy, their smiles unclouded by the tragedy that would eventually claim them both. Tears gathered fresh in her eyes as she studied the image carefully, feeling closer to her lost family than she had in years. They would be proud of you, Nora said gently, settling beside her on the familiar stone bench. Of everything you have endured, and everything you have finally overcome. Illyra closed the locket carefully, holding it close against her chest. I hope so, she whispered. I hope, wherever they are, They know that their daughter finally found the justice and the love that Corvina tried so desperately to deny her. As darkness settled fully over Blackmore, Cale found her still sitting quietly in the garden, the locket held gently in her hands. He settled beside her without a word, simply offering his steady presence as she processed the overwhelming weight of everything the day had finally brought to a close. "Justice has been served," he said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "For your father, for Lyra, if the deeper connections we suspect eventually prove true. For you, most of all." Elira leaned into him, grateful beyond words for the steady comfort of his presence. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me from the very beginning. For fighting for justice I never truly believed I would be permitted to have." "You never needed permission," Cale said gently, pressing a soft kiss against her hair. "Only someone willing to stand beside you while you claimed what was always rightfully yours." Beneath the quiet starlit sky above Blackmore, surrounded by the peaceful garden that had witnessed so much of their growing bond over the past weeks, Elira allowed herself, finally and fully, to release the last remnants of fear that had followed her since Corvina's cold smile had first sealed her fate months earlier, embracing instead the steady, unwavering promise of the future, now waiting patiently before her. In the days that followed, word of the tribunal and Corvina's downfall spread quickly beyond Blackmore, reaching every corner of the kingdom and beyond. Elira received an unexpected letter roughly a week later, delivered by a nervous, uncertain messenger, who explained it had come from the Voss estate itself. She opened it carefully, recognizing Lena's careful handwriting immediately, so different from their mother's sharp, hurried script. "Elira, I do not know if you will wish to read this, given everything our mother has done, and everything Marta and I failed to prevent through our own silence and fear. We were raised beneath her cruelty as much as you were, though I understand that offers little comfort given how deeply her actions have harmed you specifically. I write only to say that we are sorry, truly, for every moment we stood by and allowed her treatment of you to continue unchallenged. Whatever becomes of the estate now, whatever future you choose to build, Marta and I wish only to say that we hope, someday, you might find it within yourself to forgive us, even if you cannot yet forgive her. Lena." Elira read the letter several times, complicated emotions swirling within her chest. She had never held the same resentment toward her stepsisters that she carried toward Corvina, understanding even as a child that Lena and Marta had been shaped by the same cold, controlling household that had made her own years so difficult. Yet the letter still stirred old, complicated feelings she had not fully anticipated needing to process. She shared the letter with Cale that evening, seeking his perspective as they sat together near the fireplace in their shared chambers. "What do you feel, reading this?" Cale asked gently, after reading it carefully himself. "Uncertain," Elira admitted. They were victims of Corvina's cruelty as well, in their own way, though clearly not to the same degree I experienced. I do not know if I am ready to fully forgive them, but I do not wish to carry the same bitterness toward them that I carried toward their mother. Forgiveness is not something that needs to happen all at once, nor on anyone else's timeline but your own," Cale said gently. "If you wish to respond, respond in whatever way feels honest to you. If you wish to wait, that is equally valid." Elira considered his words carefully, before finally deciding to write a brief, measured reply, acknowledging their letter without promising more than she was truly ready to offer, leaving room for whatever relationship, if any, might eventually be possible between them in the future. Meanwhile, the fortress itself continued settling into a genuine, peaceful rhythm, unlike anything it had known in years. The wounded soldiers slowly recovered under the healer's careful attention, and word from the northern territories suggested the pack, without Corvina's resources and encouragement, had retreated fully into their own borders, unwilling to risk further conflict against a fortress that had so thoroughly proven its strength and resolve. Bran approached Elira directly one afternoon, finding her in the training yard watching soldiers practice beneath the autumn sun. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble, his usual gruff demeanor softened by obvious sincerity. "I doubted you from the moment you arrived, certain you posed some hidden threat to the king and this fortress. Watching everything you have endured, and everything you have contributed since, especially during the battle, I understand now how deeply mistaken my initial judgment was." "You were only trying to protect Cale," Elira said gently. "I never held your caution against you. Regardless, you have earned my full respect and loyalty, Bran said firmly. Whatever you need, whatever protection you require going forward, you have it, without question or hesitation. Alira smiled warmly at his words, grateful for how thoroughly her place within Blackmoor had shifted since her frightened, uncertain arrival weeks earlier. Thank you, Bran, she said sincerely. That means more to me than you likely realize. As autumn deepened around the fortress, painting the surrounding forests in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Cale began quietly making preparations for the formal announcement he had promised weeks earlier, one that would finally introduce Alira to the wider kingdom, not merely as his bonded mate, but as the future Queen of Blackmoor. A title she had never imagined for herself, yet one she found herself increasingly ready to embrace, alongside the man who had shown her, again and again, that love and strength could exist together, unwavering and true, even within a world that had once seemed determined to offer her nothing but cruelty and loss. The great hall of Blackmoor had never looked so alive. Banners bearing the wolf crest of House Draven hung alongside newly woven tapestries, celebrating the joining of two houses, and warm golden light spilled from countless candles and chandeliers throughout the vast space, chasing away every trace of the coldness that had once defined the fortress in whispered stories across the kingdom. Nobles and representatives from surrounding territories filled the hall, gathered to witness the formal announcement Cale had promised weeks earlier, following the final resolution of Corvina's conspiracy and the restoration of true peace along the northern borders. Alira stood in a private chamber adjoining the hall, her heart racing as Nora carefully adjusted the deep blue gown she wore, its fabric embroidered delicately with silver thread that caught the candlelight beautifully with every small movement. You look every bit the queen you are about to become, Nora said softly, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes as she stepped back to admire her work. I still feel like the same girl who arrived here months ago, terrified and uncertain, Alira admitted, studying her reflection in the tall mirror before her. Perhaps, Nora said gently, but that girl has become someone remarkable since then, someone who faced betrayal, danger, and grief, with more courage than most could ever hope to summon, and who found love and justice on the other side of it. Do not doubt for a single moment that you belong exactly where you are about to stand. Alira smiled softly, grateful beyond words for Nora's steady friendship throughout everything the past months had brought. A soft knock interrupted them, and Osric entered, bowing formally. The king requests your presence, he said, his usual composed expression carrying unmistakable warmth. The hall awaits. Alira took a steadying breath, smoothing her hands nervously over her gown before following Osric toward the great hall's entrance. The doors opened before her, revealing the full, breathtaking scale of the gathering within, hundreds of eyes turning toward her as she stepped forward, her heart pounding steadily beneath the weight of so much attention. Cale stood waiting at the front of the hall, dressed formally for the occasion, though his eyes held the same warmth and tenderness she had come to know so intimately over the months since her arrival. As she walked slowly toward him, the crowd parting respectfully to allow her passage, she felt the familiar, steady warmth of their bond humming beneath her skin, a constant reminder that whatever nerves she carried, she did not face this moment alone. When she finally reached him, Cale took her hands gently in his gray eyes shining with open, unguarded emotion as he turned to address the assembled crowd. Many of you have heard the stories, he began, his voice carrying clearly and steadily across the silent hall, of a woman sent to this fortress as punishment, cast away by a stepmother who believed cruelty and exile would finally rid her of the daughter she never wanted. What that stepmother could not have anticipated was that the very fortress meant to destroy Alira Voss would instead become the place where she finally found safety, justice, and love beyond anything either of us believed ourselves capable of experiencing again. He turned to face Alira fully, his expression achingly tender despite the formal weight of the occasion. Alira has faced betrayal, grief, and danger, with a courage and grace that has earned the respect of everyone within these walls. She has brought light back into a fortress that had grown far too accustomed to darkness, and into a heart I believed permanently closed, following losses I never expected to recover from. Alira felt tears gather in her eyes as he continued, the weight of his words settling deeply and warmly within her chest. Today, before this kingdom, and everyone gathered to witness it, I formally announce Alira Voss as my bonded mate, and as Queen of Blackmore, ruling beside me not as tribute or obligation, but as an equal partner in everything this kingdom will become moving forward. Cale's voice grew firmer, filled with unmistakable pride and love. Together, we intend to build a Blackmore known not merely for the strength it commands, but for the fairness, protection, and genuine care it offers to every person within its borders. The hall erupted into warm, enthusiastic applause, nobles and soldiers alike offering genuine celebration rather than mere formal courtesy. Elira felt overwhelmed by the sheer warmth of the moment, tears slipping freely down her cheeks as Cale gently wiped them away, his expression soft with adoration. "I love you," he said quietly, meant only for her, despite the celebration surrounding them, more fiercely, more completely, than I ever believed myself capable of feeling again. "I love you too," Elira replied, her voice thick with emotion, "more than I know how to properly express." He leaned down, pressing a gentle, lingering kiss against her lips, and the hall erupted into fresh applause and cheering, celebrating not merely the formal announcement, but the genuine, hard-won love so evidently shared between their king and his newly announced queen. The celebration continued long into the evening, music and laughter filling the great hall in a way Blackmore had not experienced in years. Elira moved through the gathering with Cale at her side, greeting nobles and soldiers alike, each conversation filled with genuine warmth, rather than the cautious formality she had feared might define her new role. Bran approached at one point, offering a rare, warm smile alongside his formal congratulations. "The kingdom is fortunate to have you as its queen," he said sincerely. "I have watched you earn every bit of respect you now hold, and I look forward to seeing everything you and the king continue to build together." "Thank you, Bran," Elira said warmly, "for everything, especially your honesty from the very beginning. It taught me a great deal about the kind of loyalty this fortress values." Later, as the celebration began winding down and most guests retired for the evening, Cale led Elira quietly toward the same high tower where he had first offered her the bonding mark weeks earlier, the night sky stretching brilliantly above them, stars scattered across the darkness like scattered diamonds. "Do you remember the first time I brought you here?" Cale asked softly, wrapping his arms gently around her from behind as they gazed out over the peaceful, moonlit fortress below. "I remember every detail," Elira said, leaning back contentedly against him. "It feels like a lifetime ago, and yet somehow, also like it happened only yesterday. So much has changed since then," Cale said quietly. "You arrived here as a frightened girl, sent as punishment by someone who never deserved the chance to shape your worth. Tonight, you stand here as queen, having faced every danger and grief that followed you here, with more strength than I have witnessed in almost anyone throughout my many years ruling this kingdom." Elira turned within his arms to face him fully, her heart full with everything the months since her arrival had brought. "None of it would have been possible without you," she said softly. "Your protection, your patience, your willingness to see me as more than the punishment I was sent here to be. You gave me back a sense of worth I believed Corvina had permanently stolen from me." "You never lost that worth," Cale said gently, cupping her face tenderly in his hands. "You simply needed a place, and someone, willing to help you remember it fully." They stood together atop the tower for a long while, wrapped in comfortable silence, and the steady, warm certainty of the bond connecting them, watching the peaceful fortress below settle fully into rest after the joyful celebration of the evening. "What comes next for us?" Elira asked eventually, curiosity and quiet contentment mingling equally within her voice. "Whatever we choose to build together," Cale said simply. "A kingdom defined by strength, tempered with compassion. A partnership built on honesty, respect and love, rather than fear or obligation. And a life, finally, that neither of us has to face, carrying grief and danger entirely alone." Elira smiled softly, resting her head gently against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. "That sounds like exactly the kind of future I always hoped existed somewhere, even during my darkest years beneath Corvina's cruelty," she said. "I simply never imagined I would be fortunate enough to actually find it." "You did more than find it," Cale said softly, pressing a tender kiss against her hair. "You earned it, through every hardship you faced, with unwavering courage and grace. Whatever challenges the future still holds, I have no doubt whatsoever that we will face them together, exactly as we have everything since the moment you first walked into my hall." Months passed, and Blackmore continued to transform steadily, under the shared guidance of its king and newly crowned queen. Illyra threw herself into her new responsibilities with quiet determination, establishing programs to support the surrounding villages that had suffered under years of northern unrest, and working closely with the fortress healers to ensure that no soldier or villager ever again lacked proper care during times of conflict. She often thought of her father during these months, grateful that his memory could finally rest more peacefully now that the truth of his death had been fully uncovered and answered. She kept his journal close, along with the small locket bearing her parents' portrait, treasured reminders of the family she had lost, carried forward now into the family she was actively building alongside Kale. Lena wrote again, as autumn deepened into winter, tentative but genuine, in her continued attempts to rebuild some measure of relationship between them. Illyra responded warmly, if cautiously, allowing the possibility of gradual reconciliation, without rushing toward forgiveness she was not yet fully ready to offer. Marta remained more distant, though word eventually reached Blackmore that both sisters had chosen to leave the tarnished Voss name behind entirely, building quieter, more modest lives, far from the ambitions and cruelty that had once defined their mother's household. Corvina remained imprisoned within the northern fortress, her once formidable influence reduced entirely to memory and consequence. Illyra visited only once, months after the tribunal, seeking not reconciliation, but closure, standing quietly before the woman who had caused her so much pain throughout her early years. "I do not forgive you," Illyra said simply, meeting Corvina's cold, unrepentant gaze without flinching. "I am not certain I ever will, but I no longer carry the fear you once held over me. Whatever power you believed you had to define my worth, I have finally, fully reclaimed it for myself." Corvina said nothing in response, her expression unreadable behind the bars separating them, and Illyra left the northern fortress that day, feeling lighter than she had in years, the last remaining chains of her stepmother's cruelty finally, permanently released. Back at Blackmore, life continued to flourish steadily around her. Bran remained a steady, trusted presence within the fortress's defense, his early suspicion long since replaced by unwavering loyalty and genuine friendship. Osric continued serving faithfully as advisor to them both, his careful caution now balanced comfortably alongside genuine warmth toward the queen he had once regarded with uncertainty. Nora remained close at Illyra's side throughout every step of her new role, a steady friend amid the sometimes overwhelming responsibilities of ruling alongside a king so deeply respected and, once, so deeply feared. As the first snow of winter began falling gently over Blackmore's dark stone walls, Illyra stood once more in the quiet garden that had witnessed so much of her journey since arriving months earlier, frightened and uncertain, sent away as punishment by a woman who never understood her true worth. Kale found her there, as he so often did, wrapping his arms warmly around her as snowflakes drifted softly around them both. "Regrets?" he asked softly, echoing a question he had asked once before, in quieter, more uncertain days. "None," Illyra answered immediately, turning within his embrace to meet his warm, loving gaze. "Every hardship led me here, to you, to this life I never dared imagine possible. I would not change a single moment of the journey, difficult as it was, knowing it led me exactly where I was always meant to be." Kale smiled softly, pressing a tender kiss against her forehead, as snow continued falling gently around them, the fortress of Blackmore standing steady and strong behind them, no longer merely a symbol of feared strength, but of hard-won peace, genuine justice, and love found unexpectedly, in the most unlikely of circumstances. Beneath the vast, star-filled sky above Blackmore, the fortress once feared throughout every corner of the kingdom, now stood as a symbol of something far different, proof that even the darkest circumstances could give way to genuine light, that even a king, once known only for his feared strength, could learn to love uncontrollably and completely, and that a young woman sent away as punishment could rise instead, to become exactly what her heart had always deserved, cherished, protected, and finally, entirely, home.